One, and good evening everyone. Welcome to Trolling with Logic. It is 14th of April 2013, 6 p.m. here in the UK, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Today we're not taking any calls. It's our famous live PWNage where we're going to take a kind of a critical look at a famous creationist documentary, and we'll see if it adds up at all. So joining me today, well, I welcome my esteemed crew. Wesley Crusher, welcome.
Hello, Captain.
Thank you, sir. Commander Data, are you there?
Hello, Captain.
And number one.
Here as always.
Okay, so we're setting course for a question of origins, and I think, are we ready to engage, crew?
I'm always ready to engage.
Oh, and just to let everyone know, whenever we encounter any critical errors, the crew will yell stop and we'll take a look at them. Just if there's any kind of small errors, which I'm sure we never come across them anyway, so anyway, engage.
In the beginning, there was nothing. A vacuum, void, empty space. And in this empty space...
this is really something that Marty ought to be addressing, but he's not here. I don't know whether or not they're about to talk about the Big Bang or whether they're about to talk about creation according to Genesis. If they're talking about the Big Bang, then before the Big Bang there wasn't even a vacuum, there wasn't even empty space, because there wasn't any space.
There was literally no material at all.
Yeah, but there wasn't even no material. There was kind of...
There was no universe.
Yeah,
there was no space, there was no time, there was no nothing. It's
just like they say, it's even impossible to try and visualize what there was before the Big Bang.
Yeah.
Wait, here's a visualization. Like, the SpongeBob episode when they went back in time. Remember that white room? It was just white. There's nothing. Remember?
Nope.
Oh.
I remember the Futurama episode where they did that.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Well, okay, similar thing then.
All right, shall we carry on?
Yep.
Sure.
Space, there emerged a primordial fireball. Billions of years ago, this fireball...
What the fuck? Primordial fireball?
I don't even know what that means.
No.
I don't know either. Is it like...
Matter?
I feel like I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons. Something has passed.
I felt like I was playing Pokemon for a second. Like, out of nowhere. Charmander.
Fireball!
Yeah.
Fireball exploded. This explosion generated all space, energy, matter.
How can it generate all space when you just said that before it happened there was empty space?
From empty space comes. I don't know.
Yeah.
From empty space does come. Now, the thing that confuses me is just, it's not that everything was created after the Big Bang. Everything was in the ball itself, and it just expanded.
Yeah, I mean...
That's all that happened.
There's also this problem with the word explosion. I mean...
It's expansion. It's inflation.
Yeah, nobody really knows how fast the Big Bang was if you could quantify such a thing. But yeah, it's probably better to talk of it in terms of an expansion of space-time.
The universe expanded rapidly, producing electrons, neutrinos, photons, and quarks. Soon, this energy began interacting, forming protons and neutrons. Matter continued colliding and interacting. Over time, the first simple elements formed. These elements also collided as the primordial soup continued to expand.
Oh.
What the fuck? Primordial soup?
They are mixed together. It's insane.
I mean, okay, whoever said that soup has to be a liquid, but no, I mean, the primordial soup is usually a straw man targeted at the origin of life and not the origin of things like stars, which is what they're actually trying to get at.
Evidently, the soup expanded across the entirety of the universe.
It's a gassy soup, I guess. I mean, I remember reading that the universe then was I think it was transparent, if I remember correctly.
It was basically a lot of gas, yeah, and
It was transparent.
yeah, there were sort of clouds in it, but it wasn't. Yeah, there wasn't anything solid that you could really look at, and there probably wasn't an awful lot of light either. I mean, they mentioned that photons were created, but really most photons come from stars, and so.
Now I think gamma rays would have been from pair production, an electron hitting a anti-electron.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much it.
Yeah, it would have been pretty dark, I think.
Cosmic and particulate evolution continued, and stars began to group, forming into the earliest galaxies. And then, just 5 billion years ago, something wondrous occurred. Within a cloud of gas in a spiral arm of the Milky Way galaxy, our sun formed.
Stop! Why was there sound?
It's
You're in space. There is no air. You have no sound when there's no air.
Can I just say that I think that Star Trek is in part guilty for perpetuating this myth.
Indeed, it is. Star Trek has had many explosions where explosions should not be happening. The sounds.
So did Star Wars, though, right? I mean, was Star Wars before?
Well, yeah, Star Wars was way less scientific than even Star Trek, so let's just not even go there.
What about 2001: A Space Odyssey?
They get it right, don't they? The only thing.
Yeah, it was pretty quiet in space.
Almost everything is accurate in 2001, except for when there's zero gravity, people move in slow motion for some reason. But no, other than that, it's fine. I mean, Alien as well, their slogan, of course, was in space, no one can hear you scream, but at the end the ship explodes and you hear that as well. But yes, no, we're not in any position to comment when we're all dressed as Star Trek characters. But yeah, it's a...
Hey, we can still critique ourselves on this matter.
That is true.
This new star gave birth to planets, moons, and asteroids.
No!
One of these...
The star gave birth to the planet. That's a new one.
That is a new one. I did not know that planets were just formed from a star forming, and it just kind of like... The planets just kind of emerged from the star and went out into orbit or something like that.
I mean, what they missed out...
Isn't that like what one of the creationists say, like the moon was something that was from the Earth, like it flew off from the Earth?
Well, that's actually, I believe that's actually the consensus is that the moon...
No, not the one that's the impact one. I'm talking about like the one where the Earth, like they just say the moon came off the Earth, like it just like ejected out of the Earth from nothing.
I've never heard that one.
That one's new to me. I don't know that one.
I won't comment on that. We're not talking about the lunar bukkake theory, whereby water was ejected at the moon.
Oh no, we're not. I don't think we're at that point yet.
It's a bit early in the evening to be talking about that.
And welcome to the bridge, Commander Worf.
Hey.
I may have to leave very soon. Just quickly, I've got dinner in the oven.
All right. Oh, well, we're still on the beginnings of the solar system, so.
Oh yeah. So I'm gonna have to run off while we're dealing with stupid that's right up my alley.
Yeah.
Yeah, evidently, yeah.
Okay, let's carry on, shall we?
I'll just quickly say that one thing that they've missed out is that our solar system is, I think, a second generation star. There was originally a single star with no planets, and when that collapsed, it fused all the heavier elements like iron and oxygen and uranium and so on, and they created our solar system. But yes, the planets aren't formed from our sun that we know it now, formed from the debris of another star, which is then accumulated.
Probably not one star. Probably a lot of them.
Okay, then. Star orgy.
These planets, known as Earth, developed an atmosphere. Earth's environment believed to be filled with volcanic eruptions, lightning, turbulent weather.
Developed an atmosphere?
You worked really hard on it.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I wonder how many times during this ponage I'm going to do this joke, but it's not that it developed an atmosphere, it's that there were, gaseous materials, or materials that would be gaseous given that particular temperature, and then a simple case of, say it with me, gravity!
Yeah, I think it was the case that certainly all the rocky, well, I mean, all the planets, they would obviously attract gases in their gravitational field. And then
Yeah.
in the case of the lighter ones like Mercury and Mars, that atmosphere was then lost. In the case of Mars, it's not completely gone, but yeah, it's not the case that they get an atmosphere. They start off with an atmosphere and then they might go on to lose it.
Well, the atmosphere they started off with is not what they ended up with.
No, that's true.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's fair enough.
they might come onto this. I think the early Earth's atmosphere didn't have any water on it. It's generally accepted that the water came from...
Wait, did Mercury ever have an atmosphere?
But, we believe that Mercury used to have an atmosphere. It doesn't anymore.
It might have had in the very early solar system,
but
basically when the planet solidified, it would have evaporated very quickly.
Ah.
Yeah.
Mixed atoms and energy to create the first simple living cells.
They kind of skipped out a lot on that
Then,
one.
through millions of
Yeah.
years,
There was a
and
lot
natural
of skipping
selection,
around. Just atoms
algae,
and stuff colliding together, all of a sudden
and
cells.
flatworms
No,
appeared.
there's a lot of shit in between there.
Yeah.
As evolution continued, fish appeared in the seas on planet Earth.
Again, you're skipping
Some
quite a
of these
bit.
fish developed into amphibians, and through natural selection changed into reptiles. A segment of these reptiles evolved into a variety of creatures, including mammals.
What?
That was a bird!
Some of these mammals became
You've got to remember we're
primates,
watching it out of
and
sync.
then, just 600,000
Hang on,
years
hang
ago,
on, hang on. I guess I'm gonna have to ask, sound, did reptiles, did mammals evolve from reptiles?
Yes. Mammal-like reptiles. Mammal-like reptiles.
Oh, okay. I thought they were separate branches.
No, I mean, like
Okay.
this. Like, wait, I can explain this. I know a lot about this stuff. Permian age reptile mammals were what cynidids, I think, if I remember correctly. They were the forerunner of mammals. Other cynidids, I think, or maybe it was a different group, split off and became reptiles, which became dinosaurs and birds and that such.
Okay, so it's a case of reptiles and mammals share a common ancestor that was reptile-like.
Like,
But
yeah,
no,
like the Dimetrodon. You know what that is?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's an ancestor of mammals. It's one of them.
yeah.
But yes, I mean, that's what they said isn't sufficiently far from the truth that I would quibble with it. And
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Go on.
years ago, an isolated group of these primates evolved into man's earliest ancestors. This is our amazing evolutionary heritage. And evolution continues today as we evolve to our even higher destiny in the universe.
Stop.
Yeah, stop.
Evolution does not have a goal. It just has, well, pretty much what survives, works.
Yeah, and it's not a higher, yeah, I mean,
We're not the pinnacle.
no, and it's not that what we're going to evolve into is higher up some ladder than we are.
You could
It's
argue it's
just
further along a
different.
path, but it's not necessarily better in any way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, bit of panpipes now.
A question of origins. How did the universe and all things that we see here on this planet come into being? Why do we exist? Hi, I'm Roger Oakland.
Hi.
Most of us have
Now, hold on a second. why do we exist? That's not a scientific question.
We do exist, though, so why do we need to ask why if we do?
Well, okay. So the question of why indicates a purpose, and the purpose is generally indicated by some sort of consciousness inflicting a purpose onto something else. So asking why we exist is begging the question that there's an outside force that gives a certain purpose or has some sort of purpose in mind for our existence. That's not necessarily the case. If you want to say, why do I exist? Well, that can be defined in several different ways. You can go into a religious philosophy or your own personal philosophy, which is generally a sort of existentialist kind of philosophy, which is that you sort of create your own purpose. And I personally think that's a lot better than something else has a purpose for you. Don't fucking worry about it.
What created that thing's purpose?
Oh, let's not go there now.
Have pondered these questions. And when it comes to the subject of origins, there are basically two views: the evolution theory and the creation theory.
There is no creation theory, you're full shit.
And it's a false dichotomy.
Believe that evolution brought about all things.
I gotta go check on dinner.
Okay.
Have fun.
Kapla. Just had to get that in there.
Strange
I
Swedish
bet
thing on.
a reptile will just come out of his oven, like right now.
Like right now, in accordance to how
like a
creation
velociraptor will pop out and just maul him to death, like from the movie Carnosaur.
Yeah. Well, given what's coming up in this video, that's actually kind of more believable than what we're about to hear.
Our universe, the Earth, and all life came into existence as a result of an explosion of matter in billions of years of time. However, there are others who believe the observable evidence points towards a creator. So how can we know?
And they're wrong.
What does the observable evidence indicate?
I have a good feeling that we're going to have a bit of an issue when it comes to what observable evidence is.
Yeah.
The faint
I
of the
also have this
things
thing
happen
to
with
say.
observable evidence.
I'd say, if we evolved from molecules, why are there still molecules? Just saying.
Both evolution and creation scientists have observed and agree that there is great variety within each species. Darwin noticed this variety and adaptability among
Hey, it's
finches.
Ken Ham.
He noticed that the finch's beaks varied in size and shape, and that the beak's features affected the survivability of the finch. Today we notice a great variety of dogs. It is believed that all 450 breeds of dogs present today had a common ancestor. Most scientists believe that this ancestor was very similar to the present-day wolf. Scientists also witness natural selection, or survival of the fittest. Evolutionists and creationists agree that those animals that are the strongest, healthiest, or most adaptive to their environment are more likely to survive and go on to reproduce.
This is probably, we said that both evolutionists and creationists accept this. That isn't really contentious nowadays, but part of the problem with Darwin's theory in his own day was not so much to do with the fact that he proposed that we were related to all other life on Earth, or that we descended from something more ape-like. One of the major problems with acceptance, certainly in the Church of England, was the fact that they didn't like the idea of natural selection. They had this rather harmonious ideal of God's creation in which all animals were happy and didn't feel pain or suffering, and God was benevolent to all of them. And Darwin's theory, whereby the implication is that every animal either dies horrifically or starves, or that they spend their life constantly in hunger and fear and so on, that was the really controversial point. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if there were still creationists today who didn't accept natural selection because they want to cling on to this idealistic view of nature. That's my bit done.
The weaker animals, which are unable to adapt,
Okay,
are
I'm
less
back.
likely to survive. We also observe gene mutations occurring. The DNA in all living organisms contains all the genetic information of life. Sometimes an error is introduced in this genetic code.
An error?
This is called
Oh,
a
is that what a
mutation.
mutation is? I thought it was just a change.
Mutations often cause disease and can be induced by radiation, chemical agents, or replication errors.
Mutations really do occur.
Why
They make all
do they
kinds of
insist
changes
on
in
calling
genes.
them errors?
Birth defects, disease
Well,
organisms.
Sorry, we'll stop there for a second. It's not necessarily wrong to call it an error, certainly when it comes to replication errors, because you can have mismatching of the DNA whereby the wrong bases in the DNA are paired up. You could regard that as an error because it's not a comfortable way of doing it. I know that part of the reason why they might choose that word is that it's loaded in the sense that it's regarded as a bad thing. So evolution.
The reason I wouldn't call it an error is because to call something an error sort of presupposes a level of
correctness.
Yeah, it does. It proposes a level of correctness to what the DNA is supposed to be, and there's nothing saying what the DNA is supposed to be, so that's why I have a problem calling it an error.
Yeah, I mean, it's a term that's used in molecular biology a fair amount of the time, but yeah, I wouldn't quibble over it too much, but yeah, I can understand that they might have chosen that word with a certain agenda in mind.
They're great at explaining the origin of disease, death, and disaster, not at all at explaining the origin of something new, some new trait that never exists, all the mutations we know about.
Did you not just explain how that happens with, with genes duplicating and causing a bit of a difference in the genes how they originally were? You just explained it. How can you sit there and say, oh, they can't explain this? You just did!
Say the word information. I dare you. I double dare you, motherfucker.
They said it.
Wrong film.
They said it? Oh,
I don't think he did.
Yeah.
I didn't hear it, but...
They called the genetic code, and they said the information...
Oh.
I mean, well, he says that he also says that mutation doesn't account for the presence of new features. Now, what are you classing as a new feature? If it's just something like a change in the color of an organism or part of an organism, then that's most certainly explained by mutation. For example, I mean, I'm a plant scientist, so I'm naturally going to pick an example. But
I honestly think when they say a change, they want something like in the 50s, like what radiation would do to like an ant. It would cause it to become a giant freaking mutant that shoots fire and stuff. I think that's what they want. They want something like that.
Or a dog giving birth to a cat.
Or Godzilla. Godzilla would disprove evolution, I think.
Yeah.
There are plenty of examples of mutations creating new phenotypes, as they're called, which are the sort of the visible properties of an organism. And if they're quite often those are, as they would say, losses of information, or rather they are genes becoming inactive, but not always. So if you want an example of a new trait that has arisen de novo, then myelinase is one of the most commonly cited ones, which is a completely new trait to the organism, which has come out of nowhere and isn't a gene breaking, it's a completely new gene.
Know about are only changes in genes that already exist.
Darwin observed.
Stop.
Genes that already exist? Did it already exist that wolves had floppy ears? Do we see wolves with floppy ears anywhere?
Well, it could happen, I suppose. I've never seen one, but it could happen.
Well, I know it could because dogs are wolves that we picked that have floppy ears.
Yeah.
I guess. Or we picked that characteristic to be more, noticeable, right?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is as well that he says that these changes only happen to genes that already exist. It's well understood that the mechanism by which new genes, in inverted commas, arise is by duplication of an existing gene and then alteration of that gene. So it's absolutely true what he's saying, in a sense, but that doesn't mean that new genes can't arise, just because they come from old genes or they come from copies of old genes.
Does that mean technically speaking, like a ladder, that DNA had all this information, okay, not information, but genes to make a dinosaur and a dog from the same genetic code? So you can make a dinosaur from the genetic code of a dog.
Well, I don't know, you see, because the creationist argument is a bit strange. It's not quite that bad, but I think they suggest that God created all the different species on Earth containing all the potential genes for the various types that we observe. And then that you've been selectively lost or re-expressed or whatever.
So, would it be better to say if I can get a sparrow to an ostrich?
Yeah, but this is, yeah, potentially. It depends
Okay.
who you ask. I don't know. You're asking somebody who doesn't really understand the creationist point that well.
What they're saying basically implies that the more primitive, the more advanced.
Really, really, it's weird. Like, they say that they have all the genes, even though the primitive thing is different than the newer thing. So,
Yeah, I mean the first DNA strand, or I mean the first RNA sequence even, would have had to be more advanced than a modern day life form by their reasoning.
Yeah.
explain to me how the second law of thermodynamics does not apply to that.
They're
things
stupid, it's
in
that
nature.
simple.
He was a good naturalist, a good observer of information. What he saw was various plants and animals altering somewhat through adaptation, through variation. He saw them
It's called evolution,
change.
jackass.
We never see
No, it's
one
called
basic
mutation.
type
What
of
causes
something
adaptation,
changing
my
into
question?
something else. That has never been observed in science or in genetics. It just has never been observed. We
Bullshit.
see it
It's
Can
never
I,
been observed. It's never been observed. It's never been observed. It's never been observed.
What was it?
La
you
la 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 la
saying
la la
about
la.
being observed?
change of species has never been observed.
Change of species.
Speciation,
that's
never
such a
observed.
The,
Ring species do not exist.
if you want to say that nobody has ever observed one species turning into another in sort of laboratory context or in the last sort of 3 centuries during which we've been studying these things, then that's almost certainly wrong in the sense
Gray
of
Fox
bacteria.
experiment, right?
Sorry?
Gray Fox?
Is that the long-term E. coli one?
No, Gray Fox.
Grey fox. I thought that was a person. I don't know about that one. Thing is with bacteria that a species is very badly defined because you
There are
can't.
new
really-
strains of that bacteria, right? There's new strains.
Yeah, they don't interbreed with each other. The sort of the de facto definition is that they have to have 95% gene similarity to be a new species, and so that means that
I
you
just
can have 3. Sorry,
did anyone notice the caption on the screen when that guy was talking?
Yeah, geologist John Morris. Is that the guy who wrote the Flood book, the Genesis
Yep,
Flood?
I think so. He's a geological engineer and he's talking about genetics. So
That's like Lee Strobel going to William Lane Craig for like stuff on cosmology.
Yeah, pretty much.
but
Still think it's hilarious.
Not as bad though. Not as bad though. I mean, they got a guy in science though, not a guy in philosophy.
Yeah.
So they're getting better.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree on that.
But I'll just say, well, the thing is with bacteria is that it's strange that you could have 3 bacteria, A, B, and C, where A and B are the same species, B and C are the same species, but A and C aren't. It's a weird setup. But if you want to, I mean, it was reported in the news last year, there was a brand new species of plant had evolved in Scotland. It was basically had risen from hybridization between a native Scottish variety and a Norwegian one, which had been imported. But it was a brand new species, a bona fide species, and they also said that it seemed to be showing far better reproductive success than the native form. So we have seen new species arise.
Well, would you define species as something that would naturally not reproduce with something else?
Yes.
So does that mean a Chihuahua and a wolf are different species in the natural sense? Because I bet if you tested this, the wolf would eat the Chihuahua.
No, I mean,
I think you're overdoing it a little bit.
Yeah, it's not about whether or not they would reproduce, but whether or not
they're capable of it,
whether
like,
they
biologically.
they genetically can.
Well, I mean, they could, but it's breeding. It's artificial. It's not exactly, you let them out in the wild.
But if you get 2 species, or if you get 2 different species and you try and cross them together, then at best they will produce a sterile hybrid. At worst, they won't be able to produce any new organisms. So that's basically what it is. They should be able to reproduce for successive generations.
We see is variety. Variety happens, adaptation happens, evolution doesn't happen.
Evolution doesn't happen. Variety happens. Genetics, all the things that I just mentioned is evolution, but evolution doesn't happen.
Yeah, I'm just curious though. What causes adaptation and variation? Like, what's the mechanism? Anybody know?
I don't
Anybody in the
know.
chat
I don't know. We're gonna have to do some research on that one.
We'll just call it witchcraft for the time being, shall we?
God did
We'll
it.
call it intelligent design.
That sounds much better.
Mutations, natural selection, adaptation. These are some of the observations that both evolutionists and creationists agree upon. But in spite of the agreements, there are substantial differences. And so the debate rages on.
Bullshit.
Where?
I mean, you have such a wide variety of life, and I don't think it's possible for one person. I mean, no matter how powerful he might be, to just snap his fingers and create life. It has to come out naturally over millions of years.
Stop.
Probably.
Yeah, this is just kind of man on the street interviews now.
I was just gonna say that guy just disproved God.
Yeah. Yeah, I've watched this documentary before, and there is quite a bit of them interviewing just random people. Basically,
It's like we have people that we like to call specialists, and then as far as the evolution side goes, we're going to go to people who don't know jack shit.
Yeah.
That's unfair in any way.
It's like Ray
I don't believe in the theory of evolution. More and more, even secular scientists are changing their viewpoints because the evidence doesn't support their conclusions.
Half of me believes in the theory of evolution.
Name an evolutionary scientist who is like, I looked at the evidence and I apologize, but I must concede that creationism is the truth.
And if you quote the intelligent design committee, I will go over to you and punch you in the face.
Okay, we're into physics now, Marty.
Yay.
We begin where evolutionists say it all began.
Stop.
With the...
Oh dear.
No.
That's
If by evolutionist you mean biologists, they don't say shit about this.
Well, the definition of evolution means change, and the change of cosmic evolution is from the Big Bang till now, right?
Did you say cosmic evolution? Because I might just have to smack you.
Yeah.
In addition to being Wesley Crusher, you've given us extra motivation now.
Go on.
Wesley,
with the
go to your
Big
room.
Bang and the evolution of the universe.
One interesting aspect of evolutionary theory is that it's such a powerful theory, and it's exercising such a strong hold over the imaginations of scientists that they've applied it outside the biological realm. They've applied it to inanimate things as well. They've applied it to the chemical elements.
But stop. It's not the same thing. There's evolution as in change over time, and there's evolution as in
Can I just
change of genes over time.
Also, one other thing. This guy, Richard Milton, he has no credentials at all to talk about this. He fucking wrote a book. That's all he did.
Well, if anything as well, it's a real mistake to include him in this documentary because he is quite obviously a transitional form between a human and an owl. You look at him. Well, when it comes up on the screen, his glasses are bigger than his head.
To stars, to galaxies. It's said that the universe itself is evolving.
Yes, it's
Did the Big
changing
Bang
over
trigger the
time, you
formation of
moron.
galaxies,
It's not
stars,
reproducing
planets,
with
and
variation.
ultimately life?
Also, that means we haven't hit
Is there
lowest
any
entropy.
order coming out of a big explosion? I would say not in any way. Explosions cause chaos.
Whoa. Did he say explosion?
Yeah, explosion.
Yes, explosions don't cause order.
Okay, and I'm going to have to... do you notice who that was just speaking?
Peanut Butter Man?
No, that's Malcolm Bowden.
Oh, he's on my hit list.
Explain for the benefit of the audience who he is.
He's the head of the geocentrism. I don't know. It's like this the Centre for Geocentrism in Britain.
He thinks we're the center of the universe.
Yes, he's an avowed geocentrist.
Yeah, he also claims that
the ether exists, doesn't it?
Yeah, the ether exists. Relativity is a fraud.
I like the fact that they juxtaposed his interview with an animation of the heliocentric model of the solar system as well.
Yeah, that guy's like, no.
He probably watched it back afterwards. He watched a documentary back and wrote and complained about it.
I bet he made a critique of it, saying, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! I didn't agree to this."
Okay, I am sure that there's a decent there are in fact a decent amount of Americans who are perfectly fine with accepting, you know, creationism and saying, "Oh, that's not too out of bounds." That's unfortunate, but if you get the geocentrist on there, even creationists, for the most part, look at geocentrists and go, we're not going to be associated with those guys. They're kind of out of their minds.
Yeah.
So, like, how are you going to get a geocentrist on your program be like, we're going to prove that creationism is preferable over evolution by using this extremely crazy fuck?
Yeah, I believe Andromeda's Wake has a video called "Why Do Creationists Laugh at Geocentrists?"
That's how far down the pecking order they are.
There are different degrees of biblical literalism, which I think is one of the funniest things ever.
Effie is a galactic centrist, remember that.
Right, let's go on.
He changes his mind on that point all the time.
Hell, I think even Mega Sage is a person, not only is he a geocentrist, but he doesn't even believe the Earth is spinning.
Isn't he a flat earther too?
Right. I don't know. I don't know if he's a flat earther, but I know he doesn't think
the Earth is spinning. Made a statement about that.
Shall we move on?
Yeah.
Random distribution of various parts that were there perhaps as a united organisation beforehand. Any explosion renders that completely null and void. There is no evidence to my mind that an explosion or even the Big Bang Theory can ultimately produce organised beings like ourselves or any other animal.
Evolutionary thinking is applied to most areas of science. The field of evolutionary cosmology proposes that the universe is the result of a random explosion.
There's actually a field called evolutionary cosmology? I did not know that.
No one is saying anything about an explosion. The Big Bang wasn't an explosion. There was nothing that could explode.
Maybe
it was a rapid expansion of space-time.
Maybe they got as far as reading the name of the theory.
Yeah.
Maybe they're like the Big Bang. Like maybe that's just as far as they got.
Yeah, and in case anyone didn't know, the name was made up to discredit the theory, and the proponents of it basically just felt, hey, yeah, that sounds like a cool name. Let's steal that and use it.
Yeah, it's kind of they were making fun of them, so they just said, oh well, we'll just go with it.
Let's call it the theory of cosmic expansion. Is that a better one?
Yeah, it would have been better, but not as catchy.
Yeah.
No examples that I've ever seen where an explosion produced an increase in order. Explosions are destructive. They cause spontaneous degeneration, not spontaneous generation.
So, I mean,
what is spontaneous generation, and who is saying that it ever happened?
The Big Bang wasn't the Big Bang Wharf, if I can even say it right. Wharf. Wasn't it a massive expansion from a point of infinite temperature, I think, or was it extremely hot?
Yeah.
And extremely packed in matter or energy, I think.
No, no matter.
Was it energy?
Pure energy, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then it condensed into matter. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So does high temperature increase entropy or decrease entropy?
That doesn't really make sense of the question.
No. Entropy doesn't have to do with temperature.
It does.
Basically, entropy is the degree of disorder or randomization in a system. And so in the case of the early stages of the Big Bang, when it was 100% energy, that's a very low entropy state because there's actually a lot of order in that system. All of the stuff is in the form of energy. As it condenses into matter, then you start to introduce a greater degree of randomization. There are more different things in that system which can interact in different ways, and so therefore that's an increase in entropy. So,
yeah, and then you also have the because the universe expands, you also make it possible for the entropy to increase even more because now there's new space for the energy and matter to be configured within.
Yeah, so there's people. Oh, go on.
I was going to say it's an exponential increase in entropy over time, pretty much, right?
Yeah, And the people who did this documentary haven't really said anything wrong. The Big Bang, I mean, haven't said anything wrong. But in that particular instance, they haven't said anything particularly wrong because the Big Bang was, in a sense, an increase in entropy, that is to say, disorder. It was an increase in order, but they don't understand that the universe started in a very, very highly ordered state and is continuously increasing.
And they're missing the point that while the Big Bang, okay, fine, let's use the horribly fucked up terminology and call it an explosion and say that it didn't produce any order. No, that's fine, but you know what did produce order once it had expanded a little and slowed down just a little?
Gravity!
Say it with me! Yeah.
Gravity, motherfucker! Gravity!
Scientists recognize that all known explosions decrease order and structure and increase chaos. The idea that the cosmos evolved also violates the second law of thermodynamics known as...
It does not.
This is
In
basically
fact,
what I was...
it follows it.
Yep. Everything in nature has to obey the second law of thermodynamics. This is basically what I was explaining with regards to the Big Bang. Everything basically will go from a high-ordered state to a low-ordered state. That doesn't necessarily deny things like lighter elements fusing into heavier ones. That's a perfect example of an increase in energy.
It's energy favorable.
Yep.
So the energy is released and the energy becomes more disordered. It's the same thing with gravity. You have something that is far away. That means it has high potential energy. Yep. It will lose potential energy if it moves close to the source of gravity, thus decreasing the energy contained within the object itself. The energy is released into a disordered state.
It's like saying that water freezing into ice, like you're saying that denies the second law of thermodynamics, or it violates the second law of thermodynamics because the water molecules become more organized. Yes, the water molecules become more organized, but in the process, energy is given out, which results in an increase in entropy within the confines of your very cold freezer.
Exactly. This whole thing only violates the straw man version of the second law, which is everything always becomes more disordered.
Yeah,
or something. That's not what the second law says.
When they think of disorder, though, they think of when they think of disorder, they think of like pieces of something coming together and congealing. I think, right?
Yeah.
Which
they have a completely incorrect view of what the second law says and what entropy is all about.
Known as entropy. The second law states that as time advances, the universe becomes less ordered. Over time, all systems left on their own proceed in a direction from order to disorder. All of us witness entropy every day as we see things age and deteriorate. This breakdown of structure directly contradicts the theory of evolution.
No. What happens to the energy? I don't care if things rust. I don't care if things decay and age. It's always a question of how is the energy organized.
It's dissipating, right?
Well, essentially, and that's exactly what happens when things become more organized as well. Something is causing it to become more organized, such as, I don't know, gravity, the electromagnetic force. Something is losing energy by coming into a state which is energy favorable.
Now, the second law allows you to increase in order, like a baby growing into adulthood or seed into a tree, but if and only if you have an
he just lost his whole case.
Outside energy source and a harnessing mechanism to capture that energy. Evolutionists don't have that.
Yeah, we do. It's called the sun, asshole.
Sorry?
What the fuck?
It's called the sun, asshole.
This is all there is. There ain't no more. There is no outside energy source. So the second law is absolutely contradictory to the Big Bang Theory.
Stop.
What we see in cosmology...
Whoa. Where did God get his energy from?
His ass.
Okay, so if we're going to go ahead and argue about evolution here for a moment, why are we talking about Big Bang Theory? Are you saying this is all part of one giant thing? Because it's not.
Well, didn't you hear that Darwin came up with this? It's in The Origin of Species. It says the universe comes from an explosion. Oh, no, wait. Sorry.
That was like 50 years later.
Sorry, that wasn't him.
That's like 50 years later, I think, if I remember.
Yeah. Right? More than that.
Okay,
everything we see, things are running down. Stars are burning up their fuel. Once in a while, a star will explode and goes from order to disorder very quickly. But the only thing we see in the universe today is the universe is running down. It's deteriorating. It's going from order to disorder. It's going to less and less organization.
There is an observation that scientists make in every field of science, and it's generally called the laws of entropy.
Stop. The supernova example, is he implying that a black hole is less organized?
Isn't a black hole like the most efficient thing at making energy, pretty much?
Well, I mean, it's about as simple as it gets. It's just a hell of a lot of matter in one spot.
Yeah, so isn't it like, it pretty much breaks everything down to energy, right? I think. Or to its parts.
Well, that's a different issue, I guess, but... fuck.
What it does isn't what it is. It's kind of the thing I think Marty's getting at.
So, would it be fair to say that a black hole is more ordered than a star, but the rest of the stuff that the sun ejects, all the gases and things, are less ordered, and they are sufficiently more less ordered that it counterbalances formation of the black hole?
The black hole is more stable, I think the word is, right? It's more stable.
Absolutely.
While the sun itself is unstable because eventually it'll either become a dwarf star or it'll become a supernova or will become a black hole, which is the most stable thing in the universe that we can think of, right?
Well, the most stable, shall we say, macroscopic body. Yeah.
Okay, yes. The biggest, most stable thing.
I don't know if it's more stable than a proton, for example. But...
Okay, the biggest, most stable thing. It's bigger than a proton. That's one thing.
Whatever. I'm gonna end up saying stupid words here soon enough. So go on.
It's as if the universe was wound up somehow and is winding down. Scientists that study cosmology talk about the ultimate heat death of the universe. Conceptually, it's quite clear from what we know that the universe ultimately sometime billions of years from now, everything will become of uniform temperatures. There'll be no difference in temperature to exploit to get useful work.
That the universe had to be designed and ordered in the finite past has not escaped the attention of secular scientists. NASA scientist Robert Jastrow wrote, second law of...
Secular scientists? Science is secular. There's no such thing as a non-secular scientist. If you are a non-secular scientist, you are not a scientist.
What are these creation scientists I keep hearing about, these Christian scientists?
Fuck you. That's no. Seriously, science is methodological naturalism. I don't care who you are. I don't care what it is that you believe. That is the fact of the matter. Now, that doesn't say that science is necessarily one that says God does not exist and we'll go from there. It doesn't do that. It just says we're not going to use God as an explanation. That's it. We don't use the supernatural as an explanation to explain the natural. The presumption made in methodological naturalism is that the natural explains the natural. That's how you perform science. You make an observation, you use a natural process to explain the observation. That's what you do. If you appeal to a supernatural cause, then you are no longer doing science. Because I will ask you a million questions about your supernatural cause that you will never be able to answer because it is outside of your observational abilities. So you can't perform science if you're not being secular about it. That's a fact.
Yeah, well, creation scientist is basically the same linguistic construction as witch doctor.
Yeah.
Law of thermodynamics applied to the cosmos indicates the universe is running down like a clock. If it is running down, there must have been a time when it was fully wound up. The next obvious question is, who wound it up?
No, it's not an
That's a
obvious
non
question.
sequitur.
That is not an obvious question. That makes no sense. You cannot say, oh.
Presupposes that there was a who.
Yeah, surely the next question is, was it wound up by someone?
It presupposes there was a watch.
This whole thing is a linguistics trick to begin with. This is kind of what angers me about this. The scientists are saying that the universe is winding down. Clearly that means it must have been at some point wound up. No! That's just a word that's used. We can use different words, and then it wouldn't be wound down or wound up or whatever the hell. It's just eventually the universe will die.
There was a point when there was less entropy. Is that better?
That works too. When there's when there's no more ability for it to be any more. I'm going to fuck this up really badly, and Marty's going to correct me. When there's no more ability to become any more like cool, essentially. When energy can no longer keep going, and it's just all in one place. Well, not in one place, but like all scattered around to the point where they can't move anymore. Yeah. When that gets to that point, we'll just say it's at that point. At that point, you can't say, well, clearly it must have been wound up, so here wound it up. You can't do that. It's all a linguistics trick. It's a semantical argument that has no bearing as to your conclusion. So just say
it's only a metaphor.
Yeah, it's only a metaphor. You can't use a metaphor to say it's like if somebody looked at poetry and then it tried to make a scientific observation from someone's poetic words. That's not how you do it.
I'm happy to go along with the metaphor, but I just, as you say, the next question should be, was it wound up by somebody, not who wound it up?
It shouldn't be.
Wound up. Just
I know, but
doesn't apply.
I'm treating that as a metaphor.
But even if we go with the metaphor, it still doesn't apply. It just doesn't work because it started from a default point.
It started out from the point that it could do any kind of work, and now it's going down so it can do less and less work as time goes on. Is that better?
But being potentially open to the idea that the universe was created by some kind of a god, then you might ask, was it wound up by somebody? We obviously are of the opinion that it was basically the universe was pre-wound.
But that doesn't explain anything, does it?
Well, no, I would object to that because it wasn't wound up. I mean, it's
only an extended metaphor. I realize that it wasn't.
But I think I understand what you're saying. I just the wording of this whole thing is just terrible.
It's made in the sense to make a rhetorical argument, and if you're trying to make a rhetorical argument based off of semantics, then you're lost from the get-go in non sequiturs. That's just a fact.
Exactly.
Gordon Van Wylen addressed the question squarely in his book Thermodynamics when he wrote, "The author has found that the second law tends to increase his conviction that there is a creator who has the answer for the future destiny of man and the universe."
Well, he's wrong.
Wait, does the creator obey the second law of thermodynamics?
Clearly not.
And did the author actually study physics?
Well, science doesn't apply to the supernatural.
Okay, then supernatural rule of thermodynamics, I guess.
I don't think there is such a thing.
Well, let's just assume that the supernatural is a copy of our real world. So the natural laws are just supernatural laws. So there's a supernatural.
Well, now we're getting into like so much speculation that will make someone's head.
Going off topic a bit there.
We never see innovation. And this, I think, is what the creationist model has been posing all along, that in the beginning things were very good. They were perfect, just like God wanted. But then, as sin entered into the universe and God's curse on all of creation because of that sin, the wages of sin is death, not only in the physical life, but in the universe. Everything is dying. The sun is burning out. The moon's orbit is decaying. Everything is in this process of death and decay.
So, wait, stop. Did he say the moon's orbit is decaying? Doesn't that mean then the moon would hit the Earth? Right?
It's actually the other way. The moon's flying away. But...
No, I know it's flying away, but I'm just saying, when you say orbital decay, doesn't that mean that it will go inwards into the planet? Like, it will hit the planet?
Yeah, that's what I get out of it. But I have to point out something else he said that was stupid. The sun is burning up. I'm sorry, what? Hang on.
The sun does not burn!
Well, no. Well, it gives off energy. Call it what you will. Is he implying that it didn't before the fall?
Well, that's what I was going to say.
As in, it didn't shine
what he
before
implied
the fall?
That before the fall of man, the sun presumably shone because we know it did. It says in the Bible.
If it didn't use up fuel, how the hell did it give off?
Let me just point out. Remember, the sun didn't exist before light existed, according to the Bible. Let there be light, and then the sun was created later on.
Yeah, but
yes, I know it doesn't make any fucking sense as far as anyone is aware.
And there was day before night before the Earth existed, which makes before the moon, I think, right? No,
but the sun, but the sun was still one of the lights that would rule the sky, right?
So the sun and the moon. The moon was the lesser light. They called the moon a light.
Yeah, exactly. So the sun was a light. Even if light existed, the sun was a light, but it apparently didn't use up fuel.
Maybe God powered it by like his cosmic scooter.
His will, his very will powered it somehow by a mechanism that no one can possibly understand.
No, wait, he used the continuum.
It's magic, fucking.
Yeah, it's magic.
Maybe when man sinned, God said, "Right, that's it. I'm not putting any more fuel in the sun. You've had your luck now."
No more fuel for the sun. It's going to burn up eventually. Screw you guys.
Yeah.
No, I have to ask: if things weren't going to die, wouldn't that suck too?
Well, yeah, it'd be
we would have we would not be able to. We wouldn't be able to function at all. Like we would all just be surrounded by people because nobody would be dying off. It'd just be everyone crammed together, bodies piled up.
That sounds
amazing.
amazing.
Exponential growth in population, wouldn't we?
Yeah, it would be awful. It would be absolutely awful.
Like, wait, you seen Dark Matter's video about this? Like with the, with like the layers of man and insects and shit.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, all the animals too. Jesus. Yeah. Not just people. Holy crap.
We wouldn't have to eat though.
Yeah, that would be even worse because we wouldn't even have any way of getting rid of the animals. Like, we can. What are we gonna do? We can't kill them because there's no death.
We can make a bridge to the moon via animal carcasses. No, wait, via animals.
Evolutionists and creationists agree now that the universe is finite. Space and time and matter had a beginning. Beginning with the studies of Albert Einstein in the early 1900s on through this century, scientists are in agreement that space, time, and matter did indeed have a beginning.
20th century science, embarrassingly.
That's not really true, is it?
Didn't Einstein believe in an eternal universe, steady state?
Well, Einstein had a hard time accepting the Big Bang, yeah, but
I think the idea of finite started a bit off the mark. The problem is that we can only see back to within a few seconds of the Big Bang. We don't really know what was going on in that singularity before. We have a pretty good estimate of, as I say, it's difficult to say that we know when the singularity started to expand. Basically,
if there even was singularity, I mean, it depends. I tend to use the word singularity to describe the state, but it's technically not correct because the singularity theorems introduced by Stephen Hawking have had the slight problem that they didn't take quantum mechanics into account. So we don't actually know, but yeah, I tend to somewhat inaccurately use the word singularity to describe the the unknown state prior to the first Planck time. But yeah, whatever.
Yeah, it's difficult to know what time would exactly mean when you go back more than about 13.7 billion years.
Yeah.
So it's not really true to say that we know that space had a finite beginning.
Well, we have a pretty good idea that space and time had a beginning. But then the whole... Basically, we get into the whole... Can space and time have a beginning, but the universe existed, quote-unquote, prior to time? That's where the jury's out. Or if there's a multiverse sort of thing, you know, it depends on... Yeah, there are different ideas there.
Has confirmed the biblical view, because the great discovery in cosmology is that the experts have agreed that the universe had a beginning, and they call it a singularity. You see, the whole Big Bang idea really is, first there was nothing, and then it exploded. The fact that the universe is finite, that it had a start, is a key fact, but a very, very awkward fact for the evolutionist. Because it really raises an issue they won't deal with, and that is what happened prior to that singularity.
You don't have any answer either!
The creation model anticipated a finite
universe.
In the first verse
there are people doing research into this. Stephen Hawking is on about M theory. Lawrence Krauss is on about the universe from nothing. There are actually people looking into this.
Okay. I'm just going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here because this pisses me off. When you like to characterize and say, everyone agrees that there was a beginning to the universe, so what happened prior to it? We have an answer. You guys don't. No, you don't. And I'll explain exactly why. Everything that has ever existed within this universe, everything that has ever began to exist, as far as we can understand the concept of beginning to exist, has always come from material objects. As a result of them coming from material objects, that is the only process by which we can understand that things have ever become to exist, because that's all that we've ever observed. If you agree that there was nothing prior to the Big Bang, well, you guys say it's God, and we say we don't really know. If you agree that there was nothing, no material prior to the Big Bang, I should say, because God is materialless and he's spaceless and he's timeless and he's changeless, blah, 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 whatever that means. If you agree with that notion, there was no material prior to the Big Bang, then we have an issue, because you have to propose a mechanism by which God could do that. And if your mechanism is magic, you're screwed.
That's not a question, right?
And you don't even have to ask how God was made. You just have to ask the process by which he was supposed to create the universe.
But you're saying there was nothing, but God is something, so there was something.
I can't even begin to classify what God would be considered as far as existence goes, if in fact he does exist, if he's timeless, spaceless, changeless, and fucking dimensionless, whatever the hell they say. Generally, he transcends all dimensions, I guess, in some way. I don't know how you could possibly even explain how he exists in any way. What we have here is we have two moments, two very distinct moments in time. Well, not even in time, but just moments. We have the moment in which there is nothing, and then a moment in which there is everything. And God existed, apparently, according to these guys, in both moments. Okay, so what? What does that mean? Does that mean that he created it? Because you're gonna have to demonstrate that in some way. How did he do it? What evidence do you have that says that he is the one who did it? Well, there's nothing that you have to say that he did anything, because you can't even explain how he could even begin to possibly do it. Because nothing, again, everything that we have ever seen always comes from previously existing material. The universe did not.
Okay, that was a good rant.
Verse of Genesis, we read, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." The Bible also states that time had a beginning. In 2 Timothy, we read, "God, who has saved us and called us with a holy calling, not according to our works."
And somewhat fittingly, given the theme of this show, Captain Kirk said, "What does God need with a starship?"
Works, but according to his own purpose and grace, which was given to us in Christ Jesus before time began.
Oh, wait a minute.
Amazingly.
Doesn't that require
how was it given to us in Christ Jesus before? That makes no sense.
Yeah,
before time began, there was no Jesus. before time began, there was no Jesus, as far as I'm concerned, because Jesus didn't come until like even in these guys' worldviews thousands of years later. So that it does not compute.
And even if we accept that what they mean is not Jesus but God because they're the same person or whatever, how could he do something before time?
I know, it doesn't make any sense. Well, it's impossible to conceive, at least, to a human imagination. How can you get
the
anything
Bible
done when there's no time to do it in?
even explains entropy. Of old, you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will endure.
Yeah,
yes,
that doesn't
they
explain
will all
entropy.
grow old like a garment. If the universe did not originate from an explosion, the only other option is that it was created. An option that
I can immediately come up with a third alternative. It originated from a rapid expansion of space-time, which is what science tells us.
Great green arc seizure.
many scientists are.
And also, it could have originated when an eternal fire met some eternal ice, and the fire melted the ice in the void in between them, and the water that resulted spontaneously gave birth to a huge cow, and the cow gave birth to a giant who killed the cow and ate the cow, and while he was sleeping after eating, 3 gods came out of his armpit, killed the giant, and the giant became the world. So the world wasn't actually created, it's just a dead giant. This is actually the Norse creation myth.
Is it?
Yep.
I thought you were actually making that up.
Nope.
All right.
Vikings were on drugs.
Cool. That explains a lot, Marty.
Yep.
Are not willing to consider.
Almost all scientists would try to find a mechanical explanation of how the stars, the galaxies, and the planetary system came into existence by purely mechanical means without any intervention of a god in creation. To my mind, they have utterly...
Excuse me, but you need a mechanical one too.
Yep.
I'm sorry, but mechanical does not mean it can't be a god. If a god did it, he did it through some sort of mechanical process. So what was that process? You don't know. You don't have an explanation. You're going to magic.
Yep.
And also, you can't even show that there is a god.
And this guy believes that the Earth's the center of the universe.
Yeah.
We have to bring that up again.
Utterly failed. If you look at the planetary system alone, there have been several explanations trying to show how the planetary system came into existence without any pre-formation by God, and each one has failed miserably.
No.
Oh.
Not the nebula hypothesis.
Observations contradict the current theories on how the solar system evolved. The most popular theory holds that the solar system formed from an interstellar cloud of swirling gas and dust. If the sun, planets, and moons evolved from the same material, they should have many similarities. Yet each planet is unique.
No.
Since about...
Stop. Most of the inner planets are mostly based of silicon, iron, all the heavier elements practically, while the outer ones are based on the lighter, like hydrogen, helium, all those other elements, right?
They're all round as well, which they have in common.
Yeah, and also the difference in composition, that the heavier materials are mainly found around the sun, can be explained by, say it with me, gravity! You fucking retard!
Also, can I invite Georgie LaForge on?
Oh yeah, cool.
Okay, one sec.
Right, we'll just carry on and just get him to hold on.
Since about 98% of the sun is hydrogen or helium, Earth, Mars, Venus, and Mercury should have similar compositions. Instead, much less than 1% of these planets is hydrogen or helium.
Oh.
Well, no shit! Genius. They don't have enough mass to even freaking hold it in, right?
Yeah.
And what I want to know is, I never understood, but why does the sun not have more heavy elements? Why does it not have a rocky core, for example?
It's younger.
But I mean, it just...
Oh wait, no.
What was
I
that?
mean, it's a giant reactor that fuses hydrogen and I think deuterium into helium. So
Yeah,
unless it was older, really old, it would have iron in it, but that would be pretty much close to it becoming a red giant.
It does have a small amount of iron in it, because stars like our sun can fuse elements up to iron.
Yeah, but it's not up to there yet. It's not up to. It's still got plenty of hydrogen to go.
There are traces. I think they found spectral lines that indicate very, very small traces of iron. But no, my question is, if all the heavy elements are sucked into the middle of solar systems or stellar systems, why do we not find any instances of suns? I can explain why we don't have very much hydrogen or helium on Earth, which is that they're so light that they escape and then they're blown out by the winds into space. That's why there's a bit of a helium crisis impending. We mine it out of the ground and then it escapes Earth and we can never recover it. But I don't know why the sun hasn't got a more heavy...
Well, I don't know that it doesn't.
Yeah, the thing
I don't know percentage-wise. You know, how much of the iron in the solar system is in the planets and how much of it is in the sun. I don't really have that figure.
I mean, yeah, because they said it was 98% hydrogen or helium. I think that we can only we can only tell that from the surface of the sun because that's the stuff that produces.
Yeah, but 98%. What about the remaining 2%? That's still more than the matter contained in all the planets put together.
That is true.
Also, why don't I see Georgie's pick on the show?
I've no idea. I don't think I have him in my contacts. But are you there, Geordie?
Yep, right here.
All right. You know how this works, don't you?
Yes, I do.
All right,
Big
so
fan.
we can just carry on. If you hear anything wrong, just shout stop.
Black guy
Definitely.
has to suck up. That's all they always have.
If the solar system evolved, all planets should spin in the same direction.
No.
But
No.
Pluto
No.
That's like saying that stupid thing Hovind said that, you know, a snow cone has 99% water, so does a rain cloud, I think it is. So they're related. That's like it's like that's straw man.
It's fun that you brought up Hovind because he's the one who made this argument.
He did?
Yeah, I believe he did.
Oh wow, I was right.
Just for anyone who is still not aware as to why some planets spin differently from others, it's because, contrary to what the beginning of this video said, our planets didn't just get birthed by our sun's soul. They were the results of other things in the galaxy, just kind of throwing matter around, either an exploding star, mostly the case, that just kind of throws the different bits and pieces around. And those bits and pieces get caught in gravity fields from different directions. And as a result, they're spinning in different directions.
Also to note that planets started as planetesimals, and those planetesimals eventually coalesced into planetoids. And, you know, eventually, like Venus, I think, was impacted by a large object that made it rotate slower, I think, right?
Yeah, well, it pretty much tipped upside down, too.
Yeah, that's part of the things that Venus could well have flipped upside down. Part of the reason why we think that's quite likely to have happened with Venus is that it doesn't have an enormous moon like we do. Our moon stabilizes our rotation to a certain extent, whereas if we were to lose our moon, then the Earth could quite easily flip upside down, and then to the outside observer, it would be spinning the opposite way.
And let's not forget the most famous one, Uranus.
Yes, that had to come in at some point, didn't it?
You did have to mention Uranus, didn't you?
What, it is tilted on
Yeah,
its,
it is.
Not all the time.
It's facing Uranus, I mean, pretty much.
Okay, let's carry on.
Pluto and Venus rotate backwards, while Uranus is tipped on its side and rotates like a wheel. All moons in our solar system should orbit their planets in the same sense. But at least 6 have backward orbits.
So,
furthermore, Neptune, Saturn, and Jupiter have moons orbiting in both directions.
Yeah, so?
Well, where do you think they came from? They came
Growing
from
a planet by many
gravitational
small
attraction.
collisions will produce an almost non-spinning planet, since the impacts will be largely self-canceling. Yet, all planets spin.
That's assuming that all the impacts are of the same magnitude. If you've got one enormous magnitude, such as two planetesimals colliding, that's going to import in
Well,
part.
yeah, sure, but he's also ignoring that there was an angular momentum to begin with.
That's also true.
So
Some
it's
much
not
more than-
all going to cancel out. That would violate conservation of momentum.
I mean, I think it was a Mars-sized body hitting the Earth. Like, I think that also affected the Earth's position in the solar system, right?
About the position, but certainly yes, the early Earth is believed to have been struck by a planet about the size of Mars, which we call Theia, and then it was that collision that produced our moon and gave us our axial tilt and so on.
More than others. Growing a large, distant gaseous planet such as Jupiter or Saturn poses an insurmountable hurdle for evolutionists, because gases dissipate rapidly in the vacuum of outer space. And
Gravity, you fucking retard!
There is a reason why you don't have small gaseous planets, which is that the gravity isn't strong enough to be able to sustain them. There's also a reason why you don't get gaseous planets close to the sun. The reason being that the solar radiation or the solar wind blasts the gases off the surface of them. But when you go further out, that's not so much of a problem because you're so much further from the sun and the solar wind is more dispersed. But yes, there was, as I say, the fact that they're enormous planets, that's what helps.
Stars, similar to our sun, do not have enough orbiting hydrogen or helium to form even one Jupiter. Scientists have no answer as to why 4 planets have rings, or why each planet is...
Bullshit! I mean, it makes sense why they have rings, because they're the most massive bodies in the solar system besides the sun. So they would have planets orbiting them. Not planets, moons orbiting them. The moons would be in a decaying orbit. Because of the decaying orbit, they'd break up and form a ring, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's also something which wasn't known at the time as documentary was made, but one of the moons of Saturn, is it Enceladus? I'll probably get in trouble by somebody who knows. It's quite an icy moon that orbits in the rings of Jupiter, but it's now shown that it actually spews out water and ice, which helps to form the ring.
I think it's Europa.
No, it's Enceladus. I don't know. Enceladus, that's around Saturn, I think.
Oh, it's Ganymede.
Yeah, Ganymede's around Jupiter as well. It's definitely Saturn. I think it's Enceladus.
Yeah, it's Enceladus.
Oh.
But yes, the rings are being formed as we speak. In at least the case of some of the rings, we know exactly how they're forming.
Okay.
Unique.
By the way, I want to make a
theories on the moon.
My quick note essentially consists of this. Let's go ahead and say that there is no scientific explanation for the existence of these rings. Why you're going to go ahead and suppose? Okay, well, God is the one who made the rings this way. Why? Why did he do it? Why? What was the reason for it? Why is this seemingly completely random fucking thing there? Why did he feel the need to say, I'm going to make rings on these planets? There was no reason for it.
Because it was so beautiful.
Moon's origin are also completely inadequate.
No.
The moon's elements are too dissimilar to those of Earth's.
Well,
and its orbital...
Bullshit.
That's bullshit. It's like, I think it's like 98% similar to the Earth's composition, right?
Yeah,
something like that.
It was titanium isotopes they studied recently and found that they were a near perfect match for the Earth.
I mean, it's iron. It has no iron. It's lacking iron, I think, right?
No, there's iron.
No,
there's
has plenty of iron.
Yeah, it's. I'm trying to think which elements it is deficient. It's going to be deficient in hydrogen, but as we've explained, that's.
What do you mean? Doesn't it have helium-3? A lot of helium-3.
There's no gaseous atmosphere on the moon, so it's going to lack all the things we have in our atmosphere. It doesn't have water, but that's the same problem as why the inner planets don't have atmospheres or are not gaseous giants because the moon hasn't got enough gravity to hold on to an atmosphere.
The lunar soil, excuse me, is still mostly silicates, very similar to the Earth. I mean, that's the whole model.
The continental crust of the Earth is very much dissimilar to the lunar surface. It's a lot more rich in silicon and oxygen. That is believed to be because when the moon formed, the Earth had a very similar structure to how the moon is today. But over time, because the Earth has stayed molten for longer, then all the lighter elements like silicon and oxygen were able to rise to the surface. And that's why the continental crust have a rather different composition. But no, in terms of things like isotopic abundance, the moon is very much related to our own planet. And even if it weren't, what does it prove? It could have been that the moon was another planetesimal that entered into orbit around the Earth. It doesn't have to be the same for it to not have been created by God.
And circular orbit offers strong evidence that the moon was created in its present orbit.
There is no evidence that the planetary system could have
Hang on. Circular orb. First of all, it's not even circular. According to creationists, it's moving away from us. That's one of the things they cite as evidence that it was created. Keep your bullshit consistent.
By mechanical mean. However, the more that scientists began to look at the amazing universe that they inhabited, they began to realize that there were certain factors that were simply very, very fine-tuned for the existence of man, of molecules.
Here we go.
We're gonna go to Lee Strobel, aren't we?
I don't know if he's in this.
I don't even know. I don't know if Lee Strobel.
Okay, not Lee Strobel, but the whole shit. The cosmological constant, the entropic principle, right?
Yeah,
well,
possibly. I don't know. Those are generally things that are appealed to when people talk about fine tuning.
Yep. And yeah, Marty's going to rage pretty soon, I think.
Yep.
Molecules of organic life, and the more they looked, the more they realized that we are in effect on really quite a knife edge, and there are many indications that this universe has been very specially designed, and man is at the very
Stop. This if you do any, I mean, if you've studied any biochemistry or any genetics, there's a lot of models out there where the reason that our molecules are so specific is because that's what the laws of physics dictate. You can't. There was an equation where the biomolecules that we have bind to just enough substrates that mathematically we don't fall into chaos. I mean, this whole argument just falls apart on the fact that physical necessity is a large part of all of this.
Yeah. And also, even if I grant that everything is so miraculously just right for us, that still implies that it had to be a specific way in order for us to exist. And once the creationist recognizes that, he has admitted that there is no omnipotent God, because an omnipotent God wouldn't care if it had to be a certain way. He would just do it.
No, I don't necessarily find that all too convincing, mainly because of the notion, a God could make us specified for any environment he wanted, and then say that we're specified for one environment, and then we think, oh, well, the environment could have been differently. Well, he made it in the sense that it wasn't that way, so there's no issue here. He was omnipotent, and he planned ahead on that point. So I don't find that all convincing. What I find a little bit more convincing is the notion that this actually isn't the only way in order for life to exist. This isn't the only cosmological constant, so to speak. The fact that things are the way they are right now isn't the only way that things have to be. If you change things a little bit, sure, things will change, and life might change as we know it, but that doesn't mean that it's going to change altogether. It simply means that things are going to be different, and that's all it really means. You can't say that we would not exist in any other environment at all, no matter what, because you don't know. You haven't observed a different universe with a different environment, with a different set of constants, so you'd have no clue what would actually arise from that.
No.
Simply a non sequitur. Also, I want to point out, Lawrence Krauss debated a creationist once. And when the creationists brought up fine-tuning, Lawrence went, well, yeah, we live in a universe that we can live in. Obviously. We live in a universe we can live in. Obviously. What is the point here? That's just a tautology. We live in a livable universe.
It's an argument that doesn't make any sense, because if you want to say something like, oh, the universe is fine-tuned, we know this by the constants, I was like, well, where's your sample size? We don't know what constants would work in what fashion. We just don't know. It's just existence is existence.
Well, we know we can live in the universe because we are here. If we were not here, we would not know, therefore, we would not know. Right?
Yep. If we try to model the universe as we know it, as we try to build a mathematical model that reflects what we know, we quickly discover there are thousands of parameters and ratios that if you adjust them even a little bit, life is impossible. We quickly discover that the Earth was a little closer, a little further.
There aren't thousands of parameters. There are 4 fundamental forces in the universe, and everything else is simply a manifestation of one or more of those forces in conjunction with each other. They are, of course, electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and gravity. And I think they're going to go on to do this silly animation in a minute whereby they show a root spectrum across the universe and how much you would need to adjust gravity to make life impossible, which is all bollocks.
You mean the giant ruler, right?
I'm not sure whether or not we'll see that. We'll have to sit tight and see. But yes, there aren't thousands of parameters. There are 4.
Further from the sun, it's either too warm or too cold. If it turns at a little different speed, if the masses are a little different, it would hold too much or too little atmosphere. As you start trying to model this, you quickly discover that all the parameters involve an incredibly delicate balance. And so they call this the anthropic principle, meaning it's as if everything we know was skillfully designed or balanced for man.
No, that's not what the anthropic principle is.
It is the way it is, and that permits us to exist.
Yeah, it's just that we exist in an existing condition.
Is at a very specific distance from the sun, and they have calculated that if we were only 5% closer, the water would boil off from the oceans.
Question.
If we were just 1%.
How much closer is 5%?
I know Venus is the limit going forward pretty much, and the limit going back is Mars. So
yeah,
well,
yeah, 5% is complete bullshit. It's a lot more than that.
I love when these guys who are clearly, this guy isn't scientifically literate enough to know what the anthropic principle is in the first place, and he's like, I've done calculations. Like, how are we supposed to believe you?
Yeah,
you don't even know what you're talking about.
It's almost like I always want to ask these people, oh, could you just show me your work on this problem?
Yeah. I would say 5% closer is just over 4 million miles. So that's
wait, I found it. I found it. Wait, give me a moment. I'm going to do it. Just give me 3 seconds. I subtract that. Let's see if that's in the orbit of Venus. It's... Okay.
No.
It's...
No, you're not going to get anywhere near Venus.
No. But yes, I mean, I think it's, say 5% is 4.6 million miles closer to the sun, and I think for liquid water you can afford to go, I think, 15% further away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is another 12, 13, 14.
I think it's basically Mars, isn't it? You can go back.
We can go
Mars is pretty much in the Goldilocks zone.
It's the outer limit, and the inner limit's Venus, right?
No, the inner limit is somewhere between Venus and Earth.
I hate to point this out, but isn't this also just like, I hate to say it, this is all just focusing on the Earth. Like, this has no relevance because, oh, yay, the Earth wouldn't be there. What about the however billion many other planets that there are?
Exactly. They're only looking at what they're interested in. They ignore everything else that actually is relevant.
Explains why there's a geocentris.
Yeah.
Yeah, why is a geocentris talking about this?
1% further away, then the oceans would freeze. And that gives you just some idea of what sort of a knife edge we are on.
The surface gravity of the Earth is exactly where it needs to be. More, you have too much atmospheric pressure, less, you don't have an atmosphere.
Actually, that could vary quite a bit.
The rotation period of the Earth, the gravitational interaction between the moon, strangely enough, all these contribute to what makes life possible. And so they call that the anthropic principle, which collectively is an overwhelming argument for a designer.
Stop.
Don't like to.
This is all assuming that it has to be that way.
Yeah,
Does
I mean,
Yeah.
again,
It assumes that it is this way by intent.
it's absolutely, as we said before, it's absolutely no coincidence that we live on a habitable planet.
Yeah.
Of course, the odds may well be absolutely ridiculously set against it, but if it's going to, well, the fact that we exist is in no way, well, the fact that we live on a habitable planet is absolutely certain because we cannot live on an inhabitable planet.
Yeah.
It's drawing
Like to
the target
acknowledge that
around
because
the
the
arrow.
designer implies accountability.
Accountability.
No, it doesn't.
That the Earth was fine-tuned for the existence of life is no surprise to creation scientists. The Bible
Well, of
declared
course
this
it's not
fact
surprising to them
thousands
because
of
they just
years
presume
ago.
they're right in the first place.
In Isaiah we read, "For thus says the Lord, who created the heavens, who is God, who formed the earth and made it, who has established it, who did not create it in vain, who formed it to be inhabited."
On my Camel Crush
Physicist
thing, it
and
says
Nobel
the
laureate
original
Arno
squeeze could
Penzias
change.
stated in 1992,
Yeah, exactly.
astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing. One with the very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the right conditions required to permit life. And one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan.
Prove it.
Astronomer George Greenstein stated in his book, The Symbiotic Universe, "As we survey all the evidence, the thought insistently arises that some supernatural agency must be involved. Is it possible that suddenly, without intending to, we have stumbled upon scientific proof of the existence of a supreme being? Was it God who stepped in and so providentially crafted the cosmos for our benefit?"
More than likely now.
The more we study the cosmos, the more psalmist words ring true. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard.
What? For me to believe that all our life and our planets came from
This is
one
more
big
man on the
bang,
street interviews now.
I don't believe it. I believe there is a higher power out there.
No, I do not believe that the universe has some sort of maker behind it.
No, I believe the universe started with the Big Bang.
I believe the Earth was designed for life because everything we see around us, everything we need to live, everything we need to survive and be happy is all around us. We don't want for anything. All our food, our air, everything to make us happy. And to
Because no one has ever
Has this guy been
starved.
to a grocery store?
Yeah, I'd just like to. I think you should maybe tell that to people in Somalia and places like that right now. They might disagree with him slightly.
Tell that to the people on the space station. They need.
I hate to be flippant about this, but like, why is this convincing that they're just taking these random people? I mean, I don't want to be stuck up or anything, but 90% of the people that I meet are just completely uneducated in terms of being able to understand any of these questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I don't care what you believe. I don't care what I believe. It's not about what anybody believes. It's about what the evidence shows. Can I just ask, is anybody else getting a nice warm feeling inside every time the VCR tracking makes the audio go wobbly?
Yeah. Brings back memories.
Yeah.
for us to survive is here. So there had to be an originator of this. It couldn't just happen by chance.
The evidence clearly reveals that God has created the universe and the solar system and specifically designed the Earth for life. Yet many would rather trust and believe in the Big Bang rather than trust and believe in the God of the Bible. In the next section, we'll examine the possibility of life arising from chemicals spontaneously.
Here we go.
First up, this is a complete straw man.
So here we go.
Everybody gets smoke ready, jelly ready.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, you know, men arising from chemicals. Therefore, if man came from molecules, why are there still molecules?
Oh, by the way, Zulu, I'm curious. How much time is left on this video?
4 days.
I'll let you know in a second. Okay, just.
Did chemical evolution on the primordial Earth produce life? According to evolutionary thought, all life, bacteria, fish, plants, animals, and man, originated from chemical compounds. This
Man
theory
is an
that
animal,
life
you
arose
idiot.
from non-living chemicals
We are made from
is
chemical
called
compounds.
spontaneous generation.
We still are. Why
Yeah,
do you study
it's like-
biochemistry?
Yeah, but it's just like that dichotomy I just said. If we're from molecules, why are there still molecules? You know?
If we're made from clay, why is there still clay?
Yeah, it's just like that. Well, if we're from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? Like, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, and they're going on about spontaneous generation right now.
It's certainly true that we are still made of chemicals, but we're certainly not still made of clay.
And just to let you know, there's 30 minutes left of this video.
That's not too bad.
Yeah, we've gotten halfway through it at this point.
We can be fairly brief with the peanut butter text.
Yeah, we can just laugh at that point.
Biology is the law of biogenesis, that life comes only from pre-existing life. And of course, for a creationist, that's certainly no surprise. Life, God's life, created life to multiply after its kind. So that makes sense to a creationist.
Hold on.
So God is a living being?
So
I thought it was sort of a magical, supernatural thing and not a living organism.
So life only comes from life. How was Adam created again? How was Adam created again? I'm wondering. And how was Eve created again? Oh, that's right.
To be fair,
dirt and a rib.
It's his rib.
Yeah, dirt and a rib. Neither of which are living things.
Well,
yeah.
A rib is kind of more living than dirt, I'd say.
Well, it's organic, but I wouldn't say that it's living. It doesn't have any sort of.
It doesn't obey the official 7 criteria for a living.
I wouldn't think so. If molecules don't, then I wouldn't say a rib does.
Well, to be fair, it has cells. You know, you have the osteocytes. And it's technically it's not a human life, but it's living.
There's also this confusing thing. I'm a big advocate that there is a difference in the definition between alive and living, which is something of a controversial topic in biology at the moment. But
yeah, there is. That's kind of why I have an issue with. I'm not going to get into it here because it's like it's a very semantical topic.
Okay.
Indeed.
But to an evolutionist, there was a time in the past when there wasn't any life. And so chemicals somehow got together and made living things, and this was often called spontaneous generation. And
it was never called that. You were talking.
Well, it was called spontaneous.
Well, spontaneous generation refers to something different.
Yeah.
It's never been taken seriously since Pasteur's experiments.
No, abiogenesis was never spontaneous generation. The spontaneous generation itself was to explain something different.
The difference with spontaneous generation in the 19th century was the whole idea that, like, from like rotten meat, you know, like I think flies congeal from the rotten meat.
That was the idea.
Yeah, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about something that's so simple, congealing from, like, you know, the slime from a liquid or something something so simple, I guess.
One of my favourite ones that they said that if you put some wheat or barley and an old rag into a clay pot and leave it for a few days, when you come back there will be mice in the clay pot, and of course it doesn't work if you put a lid on the pot. That's the kind of the stuff which disproved spontaneous generation. Abiogenesis is a completely different thing.
Does that mean mice are made of barley and what is the other thing?
Well, an old cloth or an old rag they suggested putting in the pot. That was basically what they thought. They said spontaneous generation was...
They thought mice were made of barley and cloth and...
Yeah, that's what spontaneous generation said.
Well, it makes more sense than the God making a man out of dirt, so I guess it makes sense why they don't believe it.
Well, if you do follow those instructions exactly, then you probably will find mice in your clay pot a few days later, but if you put a lid on it, then it doesn't work, and there's a more obvious explanation.
Maybe that's what God did. Maybe God put
faced in trying to get a group of chemicals to come to life. A few years ago, Stanley Miller did a famous experiment. He took some simple materials.
Oh dear.
Here we go.
We've talked about the Stanley Miller experiment before. I don't want to go over it in too much detail, but
yeah, Kent Hovind acknowledges that it was a success. He points out that 2% amino acids were produced. If the creationists were right, it should be 0.
It's irrelevant
if Kent Hovind
because this
accepts it,
it proves a very
think we're done.
point. It's true that it is completely, well, not completely, but it is largely divorced from realistic conditions of the early Earth. We've since replicated that experiment, but changing the conditions to be more realistic, and the results were in fact even more encouraging.
The experiment itself isn't performed in reducing enough quantities of oxygen and nitrogen, I believe. I don't know. It's been about a year or two since I took the course in molecular bio, but the crux of the issue is that there are many more experiments that have been more recent and more accurate, and they've yielded more promising results. Why don't they ever focus on that? I mean, it's a Miller and Urey, don't get me wrong, very landmark experiment, but I mean, this is to say that, why don't we just look at genetics in the 30s? It doesn't really work.
Remember, they want to use arguments that are from the past.
Some methane, some ammonia, some water vapor, zotzed them with an electric spark to simulate lightning flashing back and forth in the atmosphere of the ancient Earth, and in just a week he got amino acids, the building blocks of protein. And that was hailed as almost making life in a test tube. And that was one I used when I used to teach evolution. But I took a look at the rest of the evidence. And there are 3 problems with that brilliant experiment. 1, he had the wrong starting materials. 2, he used the wrong conditions, and 3, he got the wrong results. Other than that, it was a brilliant experiment.
And what was the point of the experiment? Did you take that into account?
Yeah, as I say, he may have used the wrong starting conditions and so on, but he didn't really get the wrong results because he wasn't really expecting a particular outcome. The results that he got, he analysed beautifully, and he since revisited some of Stanley Miller's experiments, and we've actually found a greater wealth of amino acids than Miller was originally able to detect. So he didn't get the wrong result. He got a very encouraging result. It showed that organic compounds can arise from simple inorganic compounds by natural means. Yes, it's okay because it's impact from the real world.
It's one of these things. It's more the fact he got a result of some description.
Well,
It's a great experiment. I mean, but it was one of those where he just wanted to see what came out. That was the question, is when you mix these compounds and under these conditions, what happens? It's not, this is the error, is that you don't write a paper on a scientific topic that isn't ultra specific to what you're talking about. It's not as general as they're making it out to be.
Yeah,
I think sorry, go ahead.
I mean, that's the problem. I mean, no one ever, writes a paper where it's like, this is going to prove that the Earth, came out of whatever. They're going to say, well, look at this specific mechanism that could have acted in this specific way.
Yeah. Well,
pretty much it's showing that organic compounds can form without an intelligent designer being required.
And
right?
it's a shame we don't have picture accuracy, because I suspect homochirality is about to come up.
Yeah.
Assumed an atmosphere of methane and ammonia, gases that could not have been present in large amounts because the ammonia would be decomposed by ultraviolet light, and methane should be...
We'll have to wait and see what they have to say about methane. First of all, it's a really weird structure of methane they've got on the screen, but I'm splitting hairs. The problem is, first of all, who cares whether they were in small amounts? It doesn't affect the chemistry. The chemistry will go more slowly if they are in small amounts, but it won't stop. The fact of the matter is that the composition of the early Earth keeps toing and froing, but I think nobody is of the opinion that there was no ammonia, that there was no methane, that there was no carbon dioxide. We know that all of these gases would almost certainly have been present. So I think this is just barefaced lying.
Should be found stuck to ancient sedimentary clays, but is not. Miller also left out oxygen because he knew that oxygen would destroy the very molecules he was trying to produce.
No, that's just blatantly false.
No, hold on, wait a minute. Why are they trying to phrase it in this way? Stanley Miller was trying to make it so that we could prove that life came on this planet without a god, because he was this atheistic piece of shit now, just wanted to disprove God. Like, that's how they're kind of phrasing it, that he was trying to disprove God with his experiment.
I don't even think. I think if you wait, is he dead? Is he dead? Because I would actually want to call him.
He is dead.
Ah, fuck! If there was a god, I'd call him.
He didn't die very long ago, did he?
Yeah, I think so. And he still has to answer questions on that experiment, and it pisses him off.
Yeah, I'd say, it's Stanley Miller. What were you thinking about when you're doing this experiment? I bet he'd say, the experiment. Like,
he died 6 years ago.
Nope.
I mean, the sad thing is this is all, I mean, a lot of the stuff that, you know, they're talking about, I've done in organic chemistry lab. I mean, it's very little of this is advanced chemistry. So it's just, the question is why, I mean, the experiments are so sophisticated now. Why kind of sit back on this one experiment, which only proved that you got these compounds from this condition, you know?
Yeah.
For fuck's sake, it was 50 years ago, right? It was more than 50 years ago, this experiment, right?
Yeah.
Even Stanley Miller didn't hold much particular sway in his own experiment, and he got very well. He had his photo taken with his original apparatus multiple times in his life, and if you line them all up in chronological order, he looks more and more grumpy every time he has to have his photo taken. But no, going back to the issue of why he didn't include oxygen, the reason why he didn't include oxygen is because there wasn't very much of it on the early Earth. There are only
before aerobic bacteria, no, there's almost none.
No, not aerobic bacteria.
Or anaerobic, excuse me.
Right. There are two ways in which oxygen is produced. One is that water in the very, very uppermost atmosphere is bombarded by cosmic particles, and that decomposes it into hydrogen and oxygen. That produces a very, very small amount of oxygen, but really not enough to be worried about. It wasn't until oxygenic photosynthetic life started to produce it en masse that it became something to worry about. So that's why he didn't include it.
Yeah.
But as deep as we dig, we find oxidized rocks, suggesting an oxygen-rich atmosphere.
No, finding oxidized rock. Well, this is again a bit of a lie on their part. If they mean that no matter how far you dig, you find rocks that have oxygen in them, no shit. There is a very good reason why you find them, which is because oxygen is a very reactive chemical species. It will quite happily detach from water to react with metals and also silicon, and so that's why you find it a lot in minerals. However, there are acidic rocks, as they're known, which contain a very high proportion of oxygen, and then there are basic rocks which contain a very low proportion of oxygen. And we don't find, well, basic rocks would have been found in the early Earth, or at least we would expect them to be found in the early Earth. And we most certainly do find those. We still find them being formed today. Basalt, which makes up the sea floor, is a basic rock. And there is also a point in the geological record whereby we find interbedded basic and acidic rocks, which marks the point at which oxygen was starting to be produced. So we do have plenty of evidence that there didn't used to be atmospheric oxygen before a certain point. So again, this is complete and utter lying on the part of the documentary maker.
And I don't know geology quite that well, but I know chemistry, and I don't know that oxidized rock, that doesn't sound like any term that I've heard, because oxidation's a general term. Perhaps they mean rocks with oxygen in them. It puzzles me, because oxidation is a...
Well.
I mean,
oxidation doesn't necessarily mean that it's reacted with oxygen.
Yeah,
No.
I mean, if you take, for example, basalt, it contains iron, which is, some of the iron is completely oxidized, that is to say it's in its +3 form, and it contains some iron which is only partially oxidized. But in cases, it's both oxidized, but it's not completely oxidized, and you would have expected the early rocks on the Earth to not be completely oxidized. As I say, it's just a complete lie on their part.
And by the way, we're on the front page of On Live, so everyone please come into the chat room. Yep. Come in and join the fun here.
Atmosphere.
The Earth did not have a reducing atmosphere, say an atmosphere of methane, ammonia, and hydrogen that was suggested in the Stanley Miller experiment. The Earth never had such an atmosphere. The geology is now clear. there is good evidence that the Earth has always had oxygen in its atmosphere.
Bullshit.
Now, that was absolute
Bullshit.
Bullshit. I call bullshit. He's doing the Gish Gallupism.
It is Gish. That's speaking there.
Also, even today, we still find actual elemental iron in the Earth, which isn't oxidized. So we find that all the way throughout the geological record as well. So there are plenty of non-oxidized rocks being produced today, never mind a long time ago.
Okay.
Preclude any evolutionary origin of life.
Miller also used the wrong conditions. He used an electric spark to combine the gas molecules. The problem is that the same spark that puts amino acids together also tears them apart, and it's much better at destroying them than making them.
So he says it works and it doesn't. That's not what he just said.
This is just stupid because this isn't what the consensus is amongst biochemists, how this happened. It's that the reaction was catalyzed in, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but Montmorillonite, I believe it is, which is a clay.
Montmorillonite is, well, it's believed to be the original catalyst that helped RNA polymerize. It's not really the stuff that produces...
Well, not amino acids.
Organic molecules. I will say, first of all, it's potentially a bit of a straw man because lightning isn't really implicated very much anymore in the origin of life. It's now to do with something called serpentinization of a mineral called olivine, which is very good at turning carbon dioxide into organic molecules. But the thing is that they say that it was the wrong conditions because it's good at destroying them. That doesn't make it the wrong conditions. Are they trying to say that he deliberately faked his results because you can quite happily repeat the experiment with his conditions and get the same result? But they say that it's better at destroying the molecules than it is at forming them. That doesn't actually make any difference. Chemical reactions nearly always exist in an equilibrium, and the forward and backward reactions can happen, and they quite often happen at the same rate. Now, this is kind of like what we were talking about with entropy earlier in the show. If you start off with a lot of with a lot of reagents, then they will go, once they're given the energy of the electric spark, they will flow through to make a product. And it may be that those products some of those will flow back through to form the reactants again. But it doesn't matter, because you started with lots of reactants, you will form products. It doesn't matter whether or not the backwards reaction is more favorable, it still happens.
The problem was the chemicals put together, the amino acids in the flask, would also be torn apart by the very spark that put them together. Miller knew that as a biochemist, and so he circulated the gases, trapped out the molecules he wanted, using a well-known biochemist trick, but that would be cheating, because you were supposed to say this is how life arose before there was any intelligent design to preserve these molecules from that destructive force. Wrong conditions. Then he got the wrong results.
Apart from the fact that there are natural traps which can help these things to form, as I say, it doesn't matter. It wouldn't matter if you didn't put a trap in to accumulate them. You'd still be forming trace amounts of things like amino acids, because that's how the chemistry works. Miller knew that. This guy clearly doesn't.
The main product of the Miller experiment was tar, a nuisance in organic reactions. Trace amounts of several amino acids that make up the proteins in living things were also produced. The problem is that Miller's experiment produced both left-handed and right-handed amino acids.
Stop.
Whoa.
Kitch is having an out-of-body experience right now.
Yeah, I think I just heard Kitch face desking all the way from Singapore.
Yeah, there have been experiments that have shown that when you start with a racemic mixture and then biological molecules take preference for one-handedness of it, for lack of, I'm forgetting one chirality, I believe, but I'm not remembering the word off the top of my head. That it tends towards that. One enantiomer, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I'm rusty, but yeah, if it favors one part of that reaction, it will continue to favor, that in whatever biological context.
Yeah, I mean, there are also several experiments into deducing abiogenesis, which start from the supposition that maybe the mechanism by which amino acids formed involved some kind of catalyst, which would only have produced left-handed or right-handed. I'm not going to go into those because I'm not fully okay with them, but there are plenty of other explanations as to how homochirality could have evolved.
Left-handed amino acids make up the proteins of life, and just one right-handed molecule prevents their production. What Miller actually produced was a poisonous brew that would destroy any hope for the chemical evolution of life.
Well,
you might say.
I'll also say that talking about amino acids probably isn't the most informative way to talk about abiogenesis anyway. It's generally accepted now that the original life form would have been an RNA molecule and some form that was able to self-replicate, and that RNA molecule may then have evolved the capacity to catalyze the formation of amino acids, and in which case you would expect it to only produce, let's say, left-handed, where it would have been left-handed amino acids.
I'd also like to point out that it says that all carboxylic acids are poisonous when aspartic acid and glutamic acid, which are amino acids, are carboxylic acids.
I think it was the fact that they were talking about the right-handed ones that are toxic, and also the tar as well that was produced, but that really have no consequence. If we start from an RNA perspective, then there are plenty of explanations. But talking about abiogenesis from amino acids is something that's true now.
Yeah.
You might say, well, if what I've just said is true, what about all the evolutionists that believe in this? Well, interestingly enough, the evolutionists would agree with me. There was a time I was at a debate at San Diego State.
Well, maybe if the evolutionists agree with you, then maybe you're missing the point. Just a thought.
State University. I was just in the audience, but two friends of mine, Dr. Henry Morris and Dr. Dwayne Gish, were doing the debate for the creationists, and at the end, someone in the audience noted, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're privileged this evening. We have in our audience Dr. Stanley Miller." And Gish had explained why Miller's experiment would not produce life from non-life. And so the person asked Dr. Miller, would you like to respond to what Dr. Gish said about your experiments for chemical evolution? And Dr. Miller said, no. He hasn't believed in that for decades. He knows all of those same problems.
I would say
he's never believed in it to begin with.
No.
Yeah, he never believed in his
on the
experiment
origin of life on the Earth, or any other planet as far as that's concerned, is a fairy tale.
Evolution teaches that energy, such as lightning or heat, plus matter, can occasionally create new life. Yet our entire food industry rests on the fact that this can never happen. If we examine a jar of peanut butter, it contains matter and is exposed
I
to
had 2
light
peanut butter
and
sandwiches this morning.
But we never find new life inside unless an outside life contaminates it.
The ants spontaneously
If the
generated
theory
life.
of evolution was viable, then I should occasionally, by subjecting this to energy, end up having new life. Now we go down to the store, and if I open this jar of peanut butter, maybe not often, but on some occasion, I should find new life.
It seems from Alien, isn't it?
And so
It's gonna be like one of those alien head humpers.
Don't open the jar.
when we open the jar of peanut butter,
It's already open though. Look at it, it's already open.
there's no new life.
No, you should get the Spaceballs version with the alien. The chest burster pops out and goes, "Hello, my baby. Hello, man."
So does anyone really want to comment on that?
Well,
just very quickly.
2 hours?
Just very quickly.
It's a closed system, you moron. You never applied any heat to it. You just said, if I apply heat to it, yet you just fucking opened and said, I'd get life.
My only comment is that the consensus amongst evolutionary biologists is that you have a catch-22 about abiogenesis, which is that once life became plentiful, then the ability for prospective life to become plentiful, that is, for new life forms to just start evolving on their own, was exceedingly rare because of the fact that things were very good at living to begin with.
I'll try and give a brief summation of why this is bollocks. I know it's been done before, but you didn't heat it high enough. There's not enough water in peanut butter. It's not fluid enough, so there's no room for chemical reaction to take place. If any, or you didn't leave it for long enough, and if any life had evolved in it, you would be far too busy stuffing your face with it and wouldn't be looking for it.
And no one is suggesting that the way matter was configured when the first life formed was identical to peanut butter. You'd have to break apart molecular bonds in the peanut butter to begin with.
Yeah.
And aren't you glad? Okay. Now, you may smile at this.
But
yes, we are.
No, we laugh at it.
But hopefully you'll never forget it, because you
Sadly,
and I
we're never going to forget this.
conduct, collectively, over 1 billion experiments every year, and we've done that for virtually 100 years.
And of
And we
those
never
billion, he eats
encountered
500 million of them.
And what does that
new
prove?
life.
That life won't come
In
from peanut
fact,
butter.
the entire food industry of the world depends on the fact that evolution doesn't happen.
The case for chemical evolution only weakens when we consider that long chains of specific...
Actually, it depends on the fact that it does happen. Have you ever heard of GMOs?
Yogurt?
What about GMOs?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much, isn't it like 1 billion people who would have starved to death if it wasn't for a certain modified, is it rice or whatever it is?
Yeah, rice and wheat.
Not really. What is it you're trying to? What's the point you're trying to get at?
Yeah, the food industry relies on evolution. Because, I mean, if these things, I mean, if he's basically saying that genetics doesn't work, right?
No, I think he's saying abiogenesis is like I think the food industry is saying relies on there being sterileness in food. So, you know, like when you open a jar of peanut butter,
when you open a jar of whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's anything. I mean, there isn't. The sad truth is that there aren't really any GMOs which are helping to alleviate famine and poverty in the third world, for reasons which I could easily spend an hour going into. No, I mean, there are certain breeding programs.
Yeah, maybe that's what I'm thinking about then, because there was some guy who got the Nobel Peace Prize for like feeding 1 billion people or something. I can't remember his name.
Norman Borlaug was his name.
And that's what I'm on about, and that's.
He developed things like dwarf varieties of wheat, which are much more.
Yeah, maybe they're not GMOs then. But it has to do with breeding. New varieties of crops.
Yeah.
Specific amino acids, all in exactly the right position, are required to form the proteins of life. Even worse, amino acids do not naturally link up to form proteins, but rather tend to...
Well, no, they do. This is again another example of entropy. If you get a load of amino acids and you just put them in solution and you heat it up a bit, they will start to form themselves into short-chain proteins, usually just referred to as polypeptides. The reason being that it's entropically favorable. If you have single amino acids at a fairly low or fairly high order state, if you start to link them into random combinations of proteins, that's a much higher, a much lower ordered state, so it's favorable. But anyway, it doesn't matter, because first of all, you can have a high degree of diversity within protein structures. They said that they all have to be in the correct place. You can substitute quite a lot of them, and the protein still works fine. We know that they don't randomly come together in a specific pattern. They're encoded for by genetic material.
To break down.
Now, proteins can be 2,000 or 3,000 amino acids long, very long, complex chemicals. And they're very much like a computer program. Every amino acid has to be in exactly the right position. If one of them is wrong, then the whole protein is useless, just like a computer program.
Stop.
I just said it wasn't. Were you even listening?
That is completely the most idiotic statement. I mean, this is why engineers are not technically scientists, and why they should have a biochemist on there and not an engineer. Because
Who's a geocentrist?
The only important region of a protein is the catalytic region, for the most part. As long as the catalytic region is maintained to a certain extent, you can mutate a lot of the other regions. And there are also some proteins that just don't really vary even if you mutate them. An example is the fibrin protein, which is used for a lot of very closely related genes for phylogenetics, because its structure can be altered. And as long as it's not completely destroyed, there's not too much negative selection on it.
Yep.
The improbabilities buried in Darwinism start right at the very beginnings, even before life began. How did the first protein molecule come about? And there's been quite a bit of work done on this to investigate the probability of it, work both by information theory technologists and also by molecular biologists actually tinkering with proteins to see whether or not they can be taken to pieces and reassembled. And the work of both groups has found that the probability of a protein of the sort of size that you find in the human body coming about by chance is so great as to be virtually impossible. It's something
but it's not by chance.
Who
it is possible if you
says
have
that's
eternity at your disposal, but Darwinists just don't have eternity at their disposal.
Information theory scientist Hubert Yockey calculated, and MIT biologist Robert Sauer confirmed, that the probability that a protein containing just 100 amino acids would form spontaneously is less than 1 chance in 10 to the 65th power. And
Sure,
it is so
if you ignore
that it
the
could be
laws of
compared
chemistry,
to
yes,
winning the state
sure.
lottery by finding the winning ticket in the street, and then continuing to find the winning ticket in the street every week for 1,000 years.
The origin of the very first animal life out of ordinary complex chemicals is so large that no evolutionist has ever been able to overcome it, and it is one of the biggest barriers to the theory of evolution that I know.
Stop.
Yeah, but you're a
completely
geocentrist,
ridiculous.
so I don't really give a damn.
I mean, this is what happens when you get mathematicians who don't know any biology and computer scientists who don't know any biology, and then you have them do biology, the work that biologists really should be doing. First off, with any knowledge of statistics, you need a prior distribution in order to get any sort of good Bayesian probability. That's the first thing. The second thing is that they're ignoring the fact that proteins were probably not the first catalytic molecules in the cell. They're also ignoring the fact that no one is saying that they spontaneously formed like that. There's so much that goes on from a physics perspective that needs to be investigated, that there's not a hard and fast conclusion as to the exact way that we can examine this.
Yeah. There's also a very nice example of this sort of probability whereby if you get an ordinary deck of cards and you give it a very thorough shuffle, the order into which they are shuffled is so ridiculously improbable, because there are so many different ways that a deck of cards can be shuffled, that even if somebody else were to shuffle a deck of cards 1,000,000 times a second, they would be hard pushed to come up with the same combination in the entire age of the universe. Now, does that mean that your original order that you shuffled the cards into, because it is by statistics impossible, does that mean that God did it? Of course it isn't. The order into which you shuffled it isn't necessarily remarkable. It would be remarkable if you said beforehand exactly what order you were going to shuffle it into, but you've got to shuffle it into something.
Even if proteins miraculously formed, we still are not close to producing life. The simplest living cells require thousands of specialized proteins in order to function.
A number of scientists have tried to calculate the probability of life arising by chance. Sir Fred Hoyle, a British mathematician, using a supercomputer and the assistance of graduate students, estimated only the origin of the proteins of an amoeba, 2,000 of them, arising by chance. He estimated that the probability that the proteins of an amoeba could arise by chance is 1 chance in 10 to the 40,000th power.
This
A
is all just
probability of
statistical
1 chance in
masturbation.
10 to the
Yeah,
40,000th
stop.
power.
This is kind of like, you know, an experiment that I think pretty much everyone has done in like high school chemistry. You mix sodium hydroxide and hydrochloric acid, and you get table salt and water.
Yeah.
Now, what is the probability that each ion from the acid will find the corresponding ion from the sodium hydroxide? That's basically what he's saying.
Yeah.
Well, it happens that way because they are attracted to each other. It's the electromagnetic force.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also ignoring the fact that, and this is a big thing to ignore, is that natural selection plays a part in this. It's not a completely random thing.
He maybe was not the first life, though. It's too advanced to be the first life.
Yeah, far too advanced. I mean, the problem is we don't have some sort of proto-life to examine.
Would a virus be the closest thing?
Yes and no. It depends how you define life. That's more philosophical than anything else. I wouldn't say that. I mean, it's just DNA and protein.
So pretty much RNA and what?
It's kind of virus biology is a little bit more complex. They're pretty highly evolved, but what a virus essentially is that it's DNA and or it could be RNA. There are RNA viruses and proteins, and one of the proteins that they have endogenously is reverse transcriptase, and what that'll do is it's essentially a mechanism by which you can take viral protein and you can take the viral genetic code and write it into the genes of the host organism or of that cell. And that's why we have endogenous retroviruses.
You mean RNA, not protein?
Huh?
You mean RNA, not
for
protein?
RNA, not protein. There's a different. I'm forgetting how it is for DNA viruses, but it's
reverse
something.
Reverse transcriptase takes an RNA sequence and converts it into a DNA.
Yeah, but I think that the transcriptional machinery of the cell acts upon the DNA of the virus when it's introduced. But I'm not an immunologist. I wouldn't be able to tell you how, or a microbiologist for that matter.
Is absurdly small. To illustrate this, consider the probability of snatching a particular atom out of the entire universe is 1 chance in 10 to the 80th power. After making this calculation, British mathematician Sir Frederick Hoyle stated, "The likelihood of the formation of life from inanimate matter is 1 to a number with 40,000 noughts after it. It is enough to bury Darwin and the whole theory of evolution."
So, no.
There was
Only if you just throw multiple big numbers at it, whether or not they're justified. Really, the probability of something like that, or the factors involved in it, are things which you can't really identify because we don't know exactly what happened or how it happened.
was no primeval soup, neither on this planet nor any other. And if the beginnings of life were not random, they must therefore have been the product of purposeful intelligence.
False dichotomy.
That's still a non
We could
sequitur.
prove mathematically that evolution is just a joke. It couldn't possibly happen. Richard Dawkins, for example, one of the leading evolutionists, in his book, The Blind Watchmaker, he acknowledges that the nucleus of every cell, plant, animal, or human, has a database larger than the 30-volume set of the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Oh my God.
All life, plants, animals, and man, are made up of cells. Each cell is a miniaturized city performing the complex functions required for life to exist. The cell membrane is self-repairing and consists of special proteins that monitor what is outside of the cell, as well as select which molecules are allowed to enter. These proteins act as pumping stations, controlling the import of nutrients and the export of waste materials. Inside the cell, we find staggering complexity. For example, the endoplasmic reticulum is a transportation network with protein-producing factories called ribosomes. The ribosomes produce many types of specific proteins, while the ER channels them to precise locations. The Golgi bodies transport proteins to the exterior membrane, while lysosomes act as digestive organs that break down and recycle larger molecules into particles the cell can use.
What's the point of all this?
The mitochondria are the power plants of the cell, producing the fuel that the cell consumes.
Why is it a rod? I don't get it.
The
What the hell
nucleus
does it do?
contains the data center, which governs cell activity. Inside the nucleus, we find the chromosomes, which contain the DNA molecule that functions as a library and contains all the coded information needed for life.
Yeah, stop.
I'd like to point out that this is the kind of thing that you would have for like an introductory high school biology class and has none of the nuance that goes into any of this biology.
No.
And also, if the point is look at all the complex stuff that's necessary for life to function, then, I mean, wouldn't just magic be simpler? Because that's where you're going. I mean, if God did it, why make it look as if it was natural?
Well, this is
like
the
he went
issue.
to a lot of effort to make it look like it didn't have anything to do with it.
This is the issue that I have. And maybe it's just me being nitpicky because I work in a lab and I'm a biologist. Like, I took an entire course. I took like a 10-week course just on cell signaling. Just on that, just on how, which is a lot of how, like, what they mentioned about membranes and stuff. They just went over an entire field that you could take a full semester course on in 5 seconds.
Mm.
And that just irks me because this is not in any way an examination of this issue. It's just kind of very, very much generalizing what the findings are.
It's armchair science.
Yeah.
Billions of instructions are coded on this error-detecting and error-correcting, self-replicating molecule. Only if all of these structures were created.
I like the fact that DNA is error correcting. DNA doesn't actually correct its own errors. There are proteins errors in DNA replication. I know it's a nitpicking thing to say, but I can't believe that they try and get away with saying it.
Well, it's not even, I mean, the error correction's not 100% accurate.
No.
I mean, there's mismatches all the time.
There's an obvious need for an error correction system to evolve as well.
Created simultaneously, could a cell function? For example, to produce DNA, a cell requires more than 75 different types of proteins. Yet these proteins are only produced at the direction of DNA. The only solution to this dilemma is creation.
So,
What?
Yeah, okay, it's false dichotomy, but also this sort of chicken and egg scenario. The thing is that, okay, the trouble is that under the current system, it is true that DNA creates proteins and proteins help to create the compounds in the structure of DNA. The thing is that there's something of an assumption that that's always how it's been, and most of the efforts involved in abiogenesis are basically working on the assumption, quite rightly, that that can't be the case because it is an obvious chicken and egg situation. That is why there's a lot of interest in trying to find out how RNA could arise by purely chemical means. And it's known that RNA has the potential for catalytic function, indeed it still has some catalytic functions today. But there could, well, the original form of life we suspect would be a completely independent RNA molecule which could both replicate itself and would then go on to be able to produce the proteins which will then help to make the RNA. So you can establish that chicken and egg scenario. Once it is established, it may be, what's the word, irreducible, but that doesn't mean that that's always how it has been.
The odds of getting DNA making protein on a roll of the molecular dice is like the odds of getting a 13 on a pair of gaming dice. The potential is not there. The probability is just plain zero.
because I say so.
Evolution teaches that bacteria were one of the first life forms to evolve from chemicals.
So,
Many.
no, it doesn't. Again, okay, we won't get over the use of the word evolution when they don't mean evolution. But they would not have been bacteria as we know them today. If anything, it might have been something which doesn't really fit into any of the kingdoms of life that we know today. It would probably have been an RNA molecule in some kind of a lipid shell or membrane. But certainly, though the earliest cells might have been bacteria-like, but they were not anything like as complex as bacteria. They would have been single cells, certainly.
Well, isn't the issue that, you know, we don't... evolution breaks down because at the last universal common ancestor was probably more of a community of common ancestors because of all of the horizontal gene transfer and the fact that, you know, one of the principles of evolution is heredity, and that wasn't fully established at this point.
Yeah, I mean, there's also this thing about the tree of life actually being a ring of life, whereby different groups of organisms that had originally diverged and then actually fused together to produce more complex cells. That's also a possibility. And yes, things like bacteria do a lot of horizontal gene transfer, and so a family tree becomes very, very difficult to draw.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really, really bad analogy, or a really bad example.
Many bacteria propel themselves with a type of miniature motor called a flagellum. These extremely efficient reversible motors rotate up to 100,000 revolutions per minute. The bacterial motor is similar to an electric motor. It has a filament that acts as a propeller, a universal joint, a stator and a rotor, and a drive shaft with bushings. Each part of the motor must function, or the bacteria will die. Since bacteria can...
No, it just won't have that kind of, quote, motor, unquote. It will have something else instead, you moron.
Well, look at...
die. Oh.
I mean, look at Yersinia pestis. They have a bunch of the proteins missing, but it can still function. It's just not as a rotor. It's as a needle, for lack of a better word.
It's called the type 4 secretory system.
Yeah.
It's basically a needle that injects DNA. But yeah, I mean, we've done this experiment as well. We've produced mutants whereby one part of the flagellum is knocked out, and of course they don't have a working flagellum, but they most certainly are alive. So that's just outright lie. I think we might have to skip over the flagellum quite quickly because it's been done so many times.
Stop and change direction and speeds. They must have sophisticated sensors, switches, and control mechanisms. All of this is highly miniaturized. 8 million of these motors would fit in the cross-sectional area of a human hair. While bacteria are small, they are not simple.
You know, I think probably the weakest
No one
in
has-
all of evolution theory is the idea of the origin of...
Stop. Just to say that they're saying that bacteria are complicated now does not mean that oh fuck, what do they call them? What is the thing? Proto-eukaryotes?
Well, not eukaryotes.
Prokaryotes.
Yeah, those things. Those things were not as complex as bacteria now.
No, they wouldn't be. And
Yeah, so they're somehow saying that bacteria, when life first began, are the same, well, bacteria that are now, which is bullshit.
Yeah.
That's what they're trying to do.
origin of life from non-living chemicals. It's probably easier to get from a cell to a person than it is to get from chemicals to life. The gap there is just so incredibly large. I'm convinced that life is so complicated, so complex, so intricately engineered that wherever life exists, God created it. And it could not have come by natural processes.
And that's why you're not a biologist,
comes from
right?
a creator. And that creator tells us that he created life here on earth. Here we see it, unimaginably complex. It must have been created.
I believe humans evolved to where we are today from single-celled organisms based on the theory of Darwinism and natural selection. I don't think that there was any sort of divine intervention.
I believe evolution is pretty much a proven theory.
I don't believe in a higher order. Just because the fact that I haven't seen any, proof or, you know, concrete evidence of that. And until somebody shows me, that there is, then I'm going to have an aversion to organized religion, and I'm going to stay on the basis of chemical evolution.
No life is simple, and all life shows the handiwork of a designer. Scientists know this, yet many believe in chemical evolution rather than be accountable to the creator God of the Bible. Next, we'll examine...
Whoa. How do you know it's the God of the Bible?
Yeah, how do you know it's that God?
What the
How do you know it's
fuck
not
does
alien?
evolution? What does evolution have to do with accountability to anything? It's just a description of reality.
Yeah, and even if I were to be stupid enough to grant you that the only alternative to evolution is divine creation, it still doesn't follow that we're accountable to our creator just because we have one. I mean, you're basically saying that if evolution is false, then your specific religion is true, not just creationism, but your specific religion.
Also, wouldn't it be a big question to say, isn't that God accountable for us because he's the one who fucking made us this way?
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't get it. Why are we accountable to him if he made us like this and we're dying and shit? So you're a prick.
I mean, my opinion on this is that the bottom line should be that even if creation seems like a reasonable possibility, I think it is still far more worthwhile to explore the evolutionary perspective, because I think it's a much more interesting story. And I think that the trouble is, as well, is that if you assume that creationism is true, then really that's the end of the discussion, and there's not much more that you can learn about it. Whereas if you go after the evolutionary perspective, that's the start of the conversation. That's the key skill in finding out things about it, and that's a much more interesting way to live your life.
Well, it's just the old thing. What spurs research is questions. You may be, I can think of an example of, can't necessarily call him a colleague, but he's in our department, and he's a professor, I'm a graduate student, but he created this whole new model of speciation that ended up being pretty wrong on all accounts. But it spurred so much interest in terms of the research in that area that now they've made a theory that actually works, from what they can tell. That's the stuff of science, is actually exploring these alleys of research, and that's why I don't think creationism works, is because there's no way to explore it.
Yeah.
Examine the evolutionary view that simple life has evolved into complex life.
Oh, bye. Should have told us he was going.
Assuming that life miraculously
there's
appeared
more.
on Earth, is it possible that single-cell life evolved to become all the complex plants and animals we see today?
Yes.
Yes.
That was Darwin's idea, that everything, every living thing on the Earth eventually could be traced back to a common ancestor.
The thing that Darwinists believe is that all the species on Earth have evolved by a process of spontaneous genetic mutation. That's a spontaneous change in the DNA, which is the program for every living thing, coupled with natural.
This again wasn't really known at the time this documentary was made, so I'm willing to forgive them for it. But the field of epigenetics is opening up some very interesting questions. One of which is that mutations in the DNA may in fact be directed slightly depending on the life experiences of an organism. Something that I won't explain here unless anybody really wants me to. But the idea that certain kinds of stresses, environmental stresses such as disease or drought or whatever it might be, can actually introduce physical and chemical changes to the DNA, and then over time that will encourage mutation in that part of the genome, which is a very interesting prospect, and it may imply that evolution is directed to a certain extent by the environment.
natural selection, the survival of the fittest. The extraordinary thing is that although the theory has been pretty well accepted universally for over a century now, there is absolutely no direct evidence to support it at all.
Darwin made a big deal about the fact that there were various sizes of finches, small, large, medium-sized finches. He made a big deal of the fact that there were finches with large beaks, thick beaks, long beaks, and thin beaks. Darwin assumed that these beaks were evidence of evolution. In fact, these beaks were the result of the genetic variability that already existed in the population. If you take two medium finches,
yes, this is what we call natural selection,
and you breed them, you will get some finches with small beaks and some finches with larger beaks. Over time, as these finches spread out into the various environments, certain beak sizes would be favored in certain environments, and therefore they would become the predominant type. But
Congratulations,
the capability
you just
to produce
explained
the small beaks,
evolution,
the medium beaks, and
jackass.
the large beaks was already in the parent population of the Galapagos finches, and it was simply the environmental differences that allowed them to be expressed. It was not the creation of any new and unique information.
The trouble is that all these finches actually do interbreed, and that is in biology, this is the test of a species. Two creatures which can breed and produce live fertile young are regarded as belonging to the same species, and all the Galapagos finches meet that criterion, so there are not many species.
If evolution was true,
irrelevant.
This is irrelevant because that's not what Darwin was saying.
No, he wasn't saying that this is an example of speciation.
We have all kinds of species that no longer exist.
Ways in which speciation can happen.
Charles Darwin theorized that given enough time, one kind of animal could evolve into another. This is the basis for the evolutionary tree of life taught in biology. Yet Darwin himself acknowledged the lack of transitional fossils in the rock strata.
Yeah.
Darwin
Yes, before they had discovered any of
geology
this
assuredly
crap.
does not reveal any such
He
finely
predicted
graduated
them.
organic chain. And this perhaps is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against the theory.
Yeah, it could at the time.
But they found the fossils.
Yeah, he did go, well, he was basically making a rhetorical statement in that. He went on to say that I'm sure that these fossils will turn up in time, and many of them have.
Yeah.
The key problem with Darwinism is finding hard physical evidence. Where would you look for that evidence? Well, obviously in the rocks, in the record of the rocks, the fossil record. Fossils have been collected for hundreds of years,
I would
for centuries.
recommend that you look for it in like a museum of natural history, because that's where they put it after they find it. Makes it more convenient for you.
Centuries. There are billions of fossils in every university and every museum in the world. But there are no intermediate species. You look at one strata and you find one kind of fossil. You look at the strata above it, you find a different kind of fossil. You don't
say
find
kind one more
gradual
time.
change.
One of the greatest evidences for creation is found in the
Wait, stop. Where's the bunnies in the Precambrian?
Again, he says, you find different types of fossils with different strata. Of course you're going to find, you would expect that on an evolutionary basis. As a species changes and diverges at different points in time, you would expect to find it in different forms. Now, I really don't understand where they find the problem in this. The only thing I can honestly think that they are expecting is that they would find a fossil which would physically change before their eyes. When you took it out of the ground, it would look like a fish. By the time you got it in the back of the van, it would start to look like an amphibian. By the time you got it in the museum, it would look like a reptile. And then by the time you let the public in to see it, it would look like a human being. That's the only thing I can think that they're looking for.
The crocoduck, that's what they're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Or they're looking for something like a fish with a perfectly formed human foot.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
You mean a merman?
Unicorn
fossil record.
Yeah.
For
yeah,
example,
like the merman from Family Guy,
so-called
remember?
Cambrian rocks, we find fossils of a vast array
I
of
don't
very
watch this,
complex
sorry.
invertebrates: clams, snails, jellyfish, worms, brachiopods, trilobites, and many other very complex invertebrates. But nowhere on the face of this earth has anyone found fossilized ancestor to a single one of those complex invertebrates. Now that fact alone demolishes...
So, everything is an ancestor to everything else.
I think he's going on, there's no ancestors to the Cambrian. But I think there is a few, isn't there?
There are plenty of Cambrian macrofossils.
Yeah.
Plenty of things that look a bit like trilobites but aren't trilobites.
This is the theory of evolution.
Evolutionists claim that these invertebrates in turn evolved into vertebrates, such as fish. However, over the last 150 years...
Is he saying clams evolved into fish?
Well,
I don't
I
know
suppose a vertebrate is an invertebrate, sorry, is anything that doesn't have a backbone. But
well, he was talking. He mentions certain examples of invertebrates before.
Yeah,
I was thinking, like, is that what he's talking about? Or,
possibly very bad scripting and very bad illustrations.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I don't know.
Years, scientists have unearthed billions of invertebrate and vertebrate fossils, and they have not found a single transitional form.
So
doesn't that mean that invertebrates came before? I mean vertebrates. Fuck.
There is a stepping stone, which is the group known as chordates, and yes, they basically have a spinal cord of sorts. They don't have vertebra. They don't have a bony strip that goes down their back, which surrounds the spinal cord, but they have a spinal cord nevertheless. And we do find both existing and fossilized species which have a spinal cord. They have what they call their chordates, but they're not vertebrates. So we have that transition at least.
All of this is ignoring the fact that there are known biases in the fossil record towards certain types of, life forms. This is what's taught in any basic evolutionary biology class. I mean, it's very, you have to be very, very careful when you make arguments about the fossil record because there's so much to consider.
Yeah.
Every major kind of fish that we know anything about appears fully formed, no trace of ancestors, and certainly no trace of transitional forms linking these major kind of fishes to one another. Now that fact is known. Evolutionists know that. Now the fact that we have no ancestors for the fishes, the vertebrates, we have no ancestors for the invertebrates, means that we didn't have any ancestors. And evolution is impossible.
A study of the geological record confirms that the major groups of animals each appear abruptly and fully formed.
That is not true. And what does fully formed mean?
Within the insect world, there is enormous variety and complexity. Yet, evolutionists offer no conclusive evidence that any of the insects evolved from a common ancestor. The same problem exists.
First of all, half the things they're showing aren't even insects, but okay. There's plenty of evidence that they will evolve from the same arthropod species. For one thing, I was learning about this today, in fact, they all have colour vision, which appears to come from a single common ancestor. It all works in the same way. The same goes for their UV vision. So there's plenty of evidence that they all come from a single common ancestor.
For all of the great variety of amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. The evolutionary tree of life has no trunk nor branches. Therefore, all of the implied intermediates are only blind speculation.
Sometimes Darwinists hold up examples of what they say are transitions. For example, I suppose the best known example is Archaeopteryx, which appears to be half dinosaur, half bird. The trouble is...
False.
That's
not what they say. Why do you keep making unintelligent comments? You are an insult to all British people, sir.
It's a bird
When
like
you look at the dinosaurs that it might have evolved from, what you find is that none of those dinosaurs had a collarbone, and birds all do have a keeled breastbone which holds the pectoral muscles, which enables it to flap its wings.
It has been claimed in the past that there are archaeopteryx.
So, in other words, in order for you to accept something as a transition, it has to be completely identical to what it was to become. So it can't be transitional.
I know, it has features. It has some features which are bird-like, and it has some features which are dinosaur-like. So
Which
it
is
may
the
not have a
definition
large.
of a transition.
It may not have a large keel like a bird, but it has teeth and it has a long bony tail, just to name a couple. It also has feathers. So it has some things which are strictly bird-like and some things which are strictly dinosaur-like.
Well, I'd like to point out at this point that the major problem with their argument is that they've defined transition in such a way that we're never going to find one of those transitions.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they've also defined fully formed in some way such that even if something is transitional by the traditional definition of transitional, they're going to say it's not transitional.
I would say there's no such thing as half a bone.
Yeah.
You've either got a bone or you haven't got a bone.
It was really nothing more than a feathered reptile. Well, I've never seen a reptile yet that you just stick a bunch of feathers in and kick it in the tail and it flies. No, Archaeopteryx flew. He had wings, and he certainly wasn't a feathered reptile. As a matter of fact, I have an article here.
Stop. If it has wings, it does not mean it has to fly like an ostrich. It doesn't fly, but it has feathers. Doesn't that mean it's a reptile that doesn't because reptiles don't fly?
They've done physiological modeling of velociraptors, saying that if they had wings, that it would help stabilize them in running fast over hills and stuff and sustaining jumps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also,
we know that.
Also keeping internal body temperature, I would say, right?
We know that Velociraptor had feathers, and yes, we think that they were for warmth. Velociraptor couldn't fly. But yes, so there are plenty of reasons why you might have feathers without having to fly.
Before me, published in March 1996 in the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology. And the authors say this: the avian features of the skull demonstrate that Archaeopteryx is a bird rather than a feathered non-avian archosaur.
The most important missing link of all, of course, is the missing link between an ape-like ancestor and mankind. That's the missing link that most of us are interested in. Have we found that? Well, if you listen to Darwinists, you'd think that we found lots of them. In fact, the evidence really isn't there at all. All of the fossils...
You haven't found the common ancestor, if that's what you're looking for, the most recent common ancestor. We found plenty of things between that and us. So, Homo erectus, Australopithecus sediva, Australopithecus afarensis. Just name a few more for me.
Ardipithecus ramidus.
Yes.
Neanderthals are not an ancestor.
No, I didn't mention Neanderthals, but no, they're not. They were thought to be an ancestor at one point, but we know.
Homo habilis, Homo erectus, etc.
Habilis.
So, but we haven't found the missing link in the sense that we haven't found the most recent common ancestor. That's about as far as it goes. We have found common ancestors for both, but we haven't found the most recent one.
Well, the issue with humans is that we have an extraordinarily rich record, so it's very, very hard to taxonomically say, well, is this a different species, or is this just a species developing along a lineage? It's not clear-cut, but there's a ton of evidence in terms of that the modern physiology of the human was developing over the course of however many millions of years we have the record for.
Part of the problem as well is due to human chauvinism. We try and find ancestors to humans, and there's been very little effort been put into the evolutionary history of the other apes, and so that's part of the reason as well why we haven't really found the most recent common ancestor. Is nobody's quite interested in finding chimpanzee ancestors, for example.
That have been found so far have been classified, reclassified, either as human or as ape. And so far the missing link is still missing.
Actually, humans are apes, so it would have been classified as both.
Yeah.
I have been investigating the so-called missing link between man and ape for many years. And I have
you also been looking for that city somewhere between London and England?
Whatsoever. For example, Australopithecus, the skeleton of Lucy. This really consists only of a 40% skeleton of a not very large ape. And they have not got any evidence that it ever walked upright in any of the bones that they have found of that skeleton.
False.
The interesting thing about that
False.
is that Lucy...
What about the hip?
The hip girdle.
Also, the bottom of the neck. Also, I mean, the place where the vertebrates connect to the head. If it was connected downwards like us, you know, it would walk upright because it would make no sense if it was looking at the ground, you know, right?
I would take this guy seriously if he was an anthropologist, but he's an engineer. He obviously has no clue what he's talking about.
Nearly all engineers on this documentary, are they? What's going on?
And authors. They're mostly authors, too.
Lucy is shown as being distinctly human-like. She's very erect in her posture. She's got human-like hands, human-like feet. I'm not quite sure where exactly the restorers got this data from, because if you examine the paper by Randall and Sussman, which described the type species to which Lucy belongs, they said quite clearly that she had long, curved hands and feet, even longer and even more curved than a chimpanzee. Several distinguished anatomists have reached the conclusion that, for example, Australopithecus, the genus to which Lucy belongs, was simply an extinct ape, nothing at all to do with humans.
We are apes.
Humans are apes.
If we analyze the so-called missing links, we find a trail of fraud, deception, and speculation.
Oh, wait.
It's a conspiracy, I tell you.
They're going to bring up Pip Down Man.
Yeah.
And they're going to bring up,
that's
what's the
where
other
they're
guy?
going.
I know it's Nebraska Man coming up, I'll warn you.
Yeah, that guy. Pit Down Man and Nebraska Man. They're going to bring him up.
Okay, I'll let you deal with it.
Nebraska Man was reconstructed, family and all, from an extinct pig's tooth.
By the press.
Yeah, that's all you got to say.
Yeah.
Piltdown Man is now universally known to be a deliberate hoax, consisting of an ape's jaw and a human skull, doctored to look old. Neanderthal.
And what about Piltdown Man?
Well, if it's a fraud, then it's not worth any more discussion, is it?
They're gonna say Neanderthal Man is a man with the riggets. I think it is.
I wanna
Yeah,
clarify.
because apparently we've only ever found one, right?
Arthritis. I know about.
I wanna clarify
Lundy.
Nebraska Man.
I thought we'd lost you.
Yeah, I didn't realize that my mic has been muted for quite some time. I want to clarify something about Nebraska Man, the pig's tooth one. That one actually was a mistake done by it was actually in conjunction, the scientist who made the discovery and the media. The media blew up what the scientist said. He said, well, I guess this could actually be the tooth of a man. And he made that presumption a little too early. All the other scientists told him, you really shouldn't say that. That's going a little too far with this. You just have a tooth. And he's like, well, it could be a guy. And then the media went nuts with it and went, we're going to draw an entire bunch of people. This is the new species. And that's kind of what ended up happening there. Then they found out it was a pig's tooth. The scientists lost all credibility, and then the media just forgot all about it.
There you go. Let's carry on.
Neanderthals were just plain people, some of which suffered from arthritis, rickets, or syphilis.
False. Wait. Let's.
Bullshit.
First off, the fact that their bone structure is completely different from someone with rickets. That's the first thing. Second thing is that someone with rickets or arthritis doesn't have the joint and bone ossification that Neanderthals have, and the fact that it doesn't change the general morphology of the forehead if you have rickets.
And also we found fucking families of them.
So yeah, shall I tell the entire story actually? Because it's quite an interesting one, I think. Or at least it explains a lot. This myth, British creationist myth, comes from the first ever Neanderthal fossil that was ever found, and of course we found a whole load of them since then. But it was originally analysed by a French paleontologist who was very secretive and wouldn't let anybody else near the skeleton while he was examining it, because he wanted to claim the discovery all for himself. And he, upon analysing the skeleton, decided that it was an ancestor of man, that it was some way between apes and, or say apes, but between our ape-like common ancestor and modern man, because it had a posture which was halfway between all fours and walking straight upright. And he was somewhat right to conclude that on the basis of that single fossil. The trouble was that when somebody else finally got the chance to analyze the fossil, they discovered that the reason for that strange posture was because that particular fossil had arthritis, and it was very easy to tell that. And so that's where the myth that creationists keep pushing around is. that it was simply a man with arthritis. The first one did have arthritis, and it had a very strange posture. We now know that we found other Neanderthals which had a perfectly upright posture, and we know that they're not ancestors of Homo sapiens. So that's where that myth comes from.
Syphilis. Ramapithecus, Gigantopithecus, and Zyganthropus were just apes, while Heidelberg man and Cro-Magnon were completely human. So, despite
what do they mean by completely human?
That's the thing, is that they're getting away with it because they're taking this evolutionary history and they're drawing a line down the middle, and they're saying everything on this side is an ape and everything on this side is a human. Of course, evolution is a gradual change.
It's like the old thing Matt Dillahunty used to say: if you line up the skulls, all the creationals will say that side's ape, that side's human, but they can never agree where the middle point is.
Yeah. Yep.
If that is not a demonstration as to why they have no ability to have any sort of taxonomical basis, it's ridiculous.
Is still missing.
One of the more amusing things you hear these days is that the DNA of man and chimpanzees is 98.
Yes?
I just have to say that tree that they drew was just fucking bullshit, because isn't it that orangutans and the gorillas, I think, are related by a common ancestor, and orangutans and chimpanzees are related by a common ancestor, and humans and chimpanzees are related by a common ancestor? Not like they all branched off from one thing.
Yeah.
There are so many things that are wrong with that tree.
98.3% identical. And I have to admit, as a geneticist, I find that kind of humorous, that you're not even that closely related to yourself. And so the genes you...
Yeah, that's the bit I mentioned. Did you catch what he said there?
As a molecular geneticist, I think this guy's a retard.
Do you think genetics that they're this stupid? Do you think they're this stupid because they're genetic?
I think he's dishonest. I don't think he's that stupid. I think he's dishonest.
Basically, your own DNA is
just...
Your own DNA differs from yourself by... Oh, I don't know what he meant by that.
Even if you inherit from your mother, the genes you inherit from your father are on the average at a maximum only 93% similar.
Scientists claim that the hemoglobin of a chimpanzee is 98% the same as the hemoglobin of a human being. What they don't tell you is there are many other organisms, including slime molds, that have hemoglobin, which is also very similar to the hemoglobin of a human being.
Now, you would expect a lot of similarities.
Did you hear him say the word similar?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just
doesn't mean it's identical.
That's a complete lie. I'm sorry. There are things like slime mold.
Slime mold doesn't have hemoglobin.
Well, I think there may be some slime molds that have hemoglobin. There are also some plants that have hemoglobin. The thing is that they're what are called analogs, which means that they serve the same purpose, but they arrived by completely separate means. And so they may look the same, they may act the same, but they are not related, and they most certainly not. The slime mold DNA sequence will obviously have a certain similarity to the human one, because if you line up any two genetic sequences, a few will line up by chance. But it's not true that slime mold hemoglobin is from a common ancestor with human ones, and it's not true that it's more closely related than any other animal.
Between man and chimpanzee. We breathe the same air, we have muscles and bones, we digest things similarly. If we were created by the same God, we would expect to have lots of similarities.
Why?
But let's suppose for just a moment that there was some truth.
Explain to me why there are organisms that have that have an anus and a mouth, and the organisms that just have a mouth that is their anus. Explain to me that.
I think
if you have a common designer, why would you want to vomit your shit out of your mouth instead of, I don't know.
He seems to talk out of the same orifice that he defecates from. So
yeah, that's a very good point, actually.
Yeah. I don't think he has an asshole. I think he's not related to us. We all shit from our ass,
Truth
right?
in that figure. I haven't got a clue where in the world it could have come from. A cloud is 98% water. A jellyfish is 98% water. A watermelon is 98% water. To use evolutionary logic, there's no difference between a cloud, a jellyfish, and a watermelon. Those two.
We lost Marty then.
What did he die?
I think he had a stroke.
No,
that was so.
First of all,
Is
it's a
this
bit of a
guy
lie.
Neff in disguise?
No, he's Ken Hovind in disguise.
It's like a kind of non-creepy version of Neff, really.
Seriously, that was so stupid. I really want to drink right now, but I have to drive to work tomorrow, so I can't.
Yeah, I have to. Yeah, I have to be honest. I drank enough last night, so my head, like the hangover, I thought I was fine, but now it's just like the headache is back with a force.
Somewhere in the universe, someone is drinking for you, both of you.
Yeah.
That's karma, I bet.
Yeah.
Or maybe somewhere
2%
Neff is
difference
passed
really
out.
make a whale of a difference in man and chimpanzee.
In the first chapter of Genesis, we are told that God created every living thing according to its own kind to reproduce and fill the earth.
Yes, and Douglas
This
Adams
is
says that you
exactly
should
what
always
we
have a
see.
towel.
If, as evolutionists claim, a reptile evolved into a bird, who would the first bird mate with?
Oh,
Another one of the same species.
Yeah, and populations evolve, not individuals.
If individuals evolved, that'd be bad.
Yep. Anyone else? Have I lost everyone?
I am literally paralyzed with stupid right now. Like,
yeah.
I didn't know you were that stupid.
I think Neff is stone drunk. That's why this stupidity is in the video right now.
Yeah.
It's like karma.
Furthermore, all intermediate forms would be fatal. What good is half a wing or half a beak?
Actually, it's quite good.
It's better than no beak, you fucking idiot.
Stop.
Apart from the fact there's no such thing as half a wing, you said there are plenty of reasons, or rather, it doesn't have to serve the final purpose.
Yeah.
With regards to things like the evolution of the wings, the consensus is that, first of all, that feathers evolved for warmth, but then things like wings assisted dinosaurs in short bursts of speed. First of all, they would be able to run slightly faster for short periods of time. They would be able to run at steeper inclines to escape from predators. Then they suspected that they would have served the purpose that they glide. So something like Microraptor would climb a tree and then glide onto another tree to catch prey or whatever it might be, or to escape. And then finally you can progress to flight. So there are plenty of opportunities whereby let's say a not fully developed wing is still a useful thing to have.
All animals have complex organs required for their survival. For instance, dolphins and bats have a sophisticated sonar that they use to locate food. Unless these highly efficient sonar systems are fully functional, the animal dies. Certainly.
No, they will simply have to locate their food some other way.
Yeah, why do they have eyes? Wait. Why do bats have eyes if they can use sonar? I mean, seriously. like they could use their eyes, can't they?
Well, dolphins certainly can use their eyes. Bats, because they're nocturnal, don't get much use out of their eyes.
But they could still use them, right?
Well, probably not. In the case of bats, they probably would serve if they didn't, or they would certainly crash into things a lot without their echolocation. But it doesn't.
I think their eyes are only good at short distances when they go.
Well, still, they would still be able to eat something.
Yeah.
The thing is that the echolocation system probably evolved while they were still sighted, and then that allowed them to see in low light levels, which meant that their eyes were no longer useful for anything, and so their eyes started to lose their function. But
yeah, so the bats that are born with better eyes than the ones without, or if they can't use sonar, echolocation, they're gonna die out. While the ones that do have better eyes will survive and multiply.
Yeah, and there was a period where they could both see and hear.
Well, this is where they fail in just common. This is why people say that common sense is the most uncommon entity in the universe. Because just think about it. You know what's more useful than being blind is having half an eye.
Yeah.
Well, it's better than no eye.
Exactly. I mean, it's as trivial as pointing out that yes, it's not as good as having full. Yes, if they had lesser developed echolocation, yeah, it'd be a lot harder for them to find food. But imagine if they had no echolocation. It's all, you have to compare it relatively. This is how natural selection works, is it takes a trait like this and it just selects out the best variants of it.
Wait, don't bats have good hearing, though, too?
That's part of the echolocation, isn't it?
That's part of the couldn't they also use hearing to find food?
Yeah.
Couldn't they use hearing?
Instead
of using
sight,
echolocation. Also, they can use one of their...
That is the echolocation.
Yeah. That's what they do with echolocation.
What was it from there?
I thought that's them, like, bouncing a screech.
That's how they're able
off
to
of
locate
something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm saying if they couldn't use echolocation...
It's how their brain...
If their ears are developed.
Could they find food by just hearing? I'm just saying, like, they move in the direction of the food.
I think what they're able to do is I think they use some of their visual processing centers of the brain to analyze the sound. But don't quote me on that because I am not a mammalian biologist.
You're not a Batman.
I'm not a Batman.
Yeah.
I do like wearing a cape, though.
Certainly, the scientific evidence overwhelmingly supports the creation model, while evolutionists are forced to admit that from their perspective, both the origin of life and the origin of the major groups of animals remain unknown.
Not really.
Are we supposed to admit that? I'm not.
Complex body structures that we have probably did not come from the evolution. Maybe it did. It's really hard to decide which one it could be.
To me, again, it takes more faith to believe that all these perfect conditions came together at the right moment to allow all these complex aspects of life to come into being and to come into existence. And to me, it takes a lot more faith to believe that hogwash than it does to believe that there's an awesome God that created us.
Evolutionists are trying desperately to hold on to a failing theory rather than to acknowledge the creator God of the Bible. Despite this, the evidence continues to mount to support the creation model. But how can we know that the God of the Bible is the
because
creator?
You haven't brought one up so far.
The scientific evidence in this century has indeed proven that space-time and matter is finite, and it tells us that the creator must be a being who's independent of space and time. Only the Bible teaches the notion of a finite universe and a creator.
There's no necessity for a creator.
Is this Casey Lumpkin? I mean, Lumpkin?
Luskin, no.
Oh.
Casey Munchkin.
Who is fully transcendent. That is, he's independent of space and time, but he can also act within a space-time domain.
Bullshit,
no other holy
and that's a
book
contradiction.
on the earth teaches such a creator.
If you look at any of the other religious books, all of them presume a three-dimensional universe and a three-dimensional God. And that's amazing to realize that only the Bible has, as its distinctiveness, a transcendent presentation.
The Quran has exactly the same thing.
And pretty much
Jews have the same thing too.
Yeah, and the Hindus have the same thing. Basically, it's just that their gods take physical forms well, I think.
Yeah, it's just, yeah.
He's basically full of shit.
Basically, you can tell we're getting to the end.
Is this almost over?
Yeah, well, we've got experience. We know that when the sermon starts, it's getting to the end. They always finish on a sermon.
Astronomers believe that there was somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 stars. This held in the science of astronomy until Galileo came along with his telescope, and suddenly science realized that the stars of the heaven are innumerable. Billions of galaxies, billions of stars in these galaxies, innumerable, just like God said to Abraham way back in Genesis, the first book of the Bible.
Is that the geocentrist?
Throughout the Bible,
I have no idea who that guy was. He's a Bible teacher.
But what Yeah, so God said that there would be large gaseous bodies that undergo gigantic fusion reactions in outer space. He said that in the Bible. Man, I must really suck at literature more than I thought I did,
But
because I didn't get any of that.
It wouldn't take much to look at the stars and say, oh, you could never count them all, like
Yeah.
thousands of years ago.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you go to any part, really dark part of the world, then you will quickly realise that you can't look anywhere for stars. It's basically like a cloud almost.
Yeah.
You don't get this so much now that we live in built-up areas where there's so much light pollution that you tend to see the brighter ones. But yeah, it's not too difficult to imagine that they knew that the stars were innumerable that far back.
Bible, we find insights about the physical universe that the scientific world has only recently discovered. For instance, in the book of Jonah, we read, "The water compassed me about, even to the soul. The depth closed me round about. The weeds were wrapped about my head. I went down to the bottoms of the mountains." In this amazing verse, we are told that there are mountains on the ocean floor. Yet scientists did not
and
know.
Tommy Wiseau said, "You're tearing me apart, Lisa."
Not know this until this century.
And JFK predicted
In the book of Job,
before he died,
Job
we would go to the moon in the century in this decade. He was right. He's a prophet.
proclaims that God hangs the earth on nothing. While many holy books declared that the earth sits on the backs of turtles or elephants, or is held up by Atlas, the Bible alone declares what we now know to be true.
That it stands on solid foundations.
Or it hangs on nothing.
Marty.
Or that it stands on 4 pillars.
Yeah, Marty, do you want to quickly go over the earth hangs on nothing bollocks?
It's falling.
There we go.
It's called... Okay, I see where you're going.
In
Say it
Hebrews
with
chapter
me.
11,
Gravity!
verse 3, we
You
read,
fucking
"By faith
retard.
we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God,
I'm gonna have to
so that
start
the things
paying
which
Desert
are
File
seen
royalties, I think.
were not made of things which are visible." Only recently have scientists discovered that everything in the universe is made up of subatomic particles that are indeed invisible to the naked eye. Certainly these authors were inspired by the creator of the universe. Many other scientific insights were revealed in the Bible centuries before man discovered them. For example,
in fact, you can
atomic
live
fission,
in a giant fish for 3
oceanic
days.
currents, the hydrologic cycle, the jet stream,
And you can cure
dinosaurs,
leprosy by killing
and
birds.
innumerable stars.
And all of us came
We
from
know
2
that
people.
when Columbus made his trip to discover India and landed here in America, that when he took off, there was tremendous fears that he would come to the edge of the earth and would plunge off into nothing. And yet, had they read the Bible, they would have known that Isaiah talks about the circle of the earth, and that the earth is actually
What's a circle?
A circle's not a fucking
No, it's
sphere.
not.
It's not a sphere, and this is besides the fact that Eratosthenes had already determined that the Earth was round by calculations of curvature.
And he was within 15% of the actual diameter, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was very close.
Which is
So this guy...
And that one of the ancient Greek astronomers realized that the Earth's shadow on the moon was always circular and deduced from that the Earth must be a sphere.
Yep.
Yeah.
Be round.
I challenge anyone to find scientific errors in the Bible. They're not there.
What's fascinating is the more you know about the
You
scripture and
want
the more
a
you know about
list.
contemporary science.
Tell me
you
what science
discover
book
that
has
the
more
Bible has
errors than the
anticipated.
Bible.
As a Christian, we can believe in creation and the laws of science at the same time. And
No,
as a
you
scientist,
can't,
I'd
because
lot rather
creation
believe a theory that fits with the
violates
evidence that we
the
can
laws
really
of
see.
physics.
Always, whenever we study, whenever we really can observe, we'll see that science supports God's word.
I
No.
would challenge those
That's what it does.
who are declaring that the Bible is filled with myths to investigate for yourself with an open
Talking
mind.
snakes.
And I know
The sun stopped.
they'll discover
Unicorns.
Talking
Zombies.
A question of origins.
A
We
god.
examined the evidence. Now it's up to you as an individual to
Only
make a
one
choice.
God, why not two?
In the book of Romans, chapter 1, the Bible tells us that the evidence that God has created
A world full of
is
blood.
so obvious from the things that God has made that if you reject that evidence, you are without excuse. And in the book of Colossians, chapter 1, the Bible tells us who the Creator is. Not only that He has created all things, but that He has redeemed us from our sins through His death upon the cross at Calvary. The Creator is Jesus Christ. Will you acknowledge that you have been created? Will you recognize that you have been separated from the Creator, Jesus Christ, because of your sins? Will you
can
accept
start
Him,
by
who
proving
He
it.
is, and what He's done, and who you are, and what you've done? It will be the greatest choice that you could ever make for eternity.
Why don't you just hold a gun to my head?
Please send $10 to this 80 quest.
Yeah, exactly. That's where we're going.
And that's it over.
Thank
Oh,
fuck.
no calling fee. I'd love to call them.
Wasn't that fun?
Yes.
Well, that was stupid.
Okay.
This is the reason
Wait.
why
I want to ask the audience. Hey, anybody here feel like they found Jesus? Anybody? Because I feel like I found Jesus. Even though I would say that's complete bullshit, but anyone found Jesus?
Yeah, he does my lawn work.
Yeah, besides your lawn, besides the Mexican.
Oh no, wait, his name is Jesus. My bad.
Anyway, our next live PWNage is in a month's time. I'll just check. May the 19th, and it's Mr. Ian Juby's going to be the target that day.
Hey!
Oh, good.
Hold that bucket.
Looks like Will found Jesus.
In the meantime, now that we've gone to the very bottom, and next week we promise it'll be a higher standard of show because we've got the wonderful Dr. Stephen Law joining the show.
Yes.
And Lundy, you can tell us a little bit about Dr. Law.
Dr. Law is a fantastic philosopher who has debated William Lane Craig and Hans Sortzis and various other people in the past. He has produced much scholarly work on the topic of religion, on the topic of epistemology, how we come to believe things, especially things that aren't in fact true. He has created what I think is a fantastic argument to just use in any sort of situation where morality has been brought up, and that is a variant on the evidentiary problem of evil. It's a fantastic one. You can see it in just about any one of his debates. He always brings it up. As far as I've seen, never been refuted. William Lane Craig didn't even address it. All he really did was say, okay, we'll just ignore that argument for now. Why don't you try and address Kalam for me? I know how to defend Kalam. That's kind of how that went. So I recommend everybody look him up.
He doesn't even know that.
Yeah, he's also written a heap of really good books that are kind of basic primers on philosophy. Like I think he's a really big proponent of making philosophy more accessible to the public. He's a pop.
Sounds like someone I need to check out.
Yeah, and he's also a fellow of the Rationalist Association, as well as the British Humanist Association, and he's also the editor of the Journal of the Royal Institute of Philosophy here in the UK.
Also known as, I believe, Think?
Yes, that's what it is.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's going to be an interesting one, and I know Lundy has been waiting very patiently for that show as well.
Don't get many philosophers on the show.
Yeah.
I'm always happy when we do.
So, right, thank you very much, crew. I think I'll go through you each for your final thoughts. Mr. Crusher.
I would say, I did not find Jesus, and if you never found Jesus, you're fucking retarded. That's all I have to say.
Commander Data.
I found peanut butter. I found it to be delicious, and I found it to be devoid of new life, so I'm converted.
All right.
You're a robot. You can't have human feelings.
Lieutenant Worf.
This was stupid.
Okay. Number one.
I must say that I agree with the assessment of my good colleague, Lieutenant Worf.
And Mr. LaForge.
I would like to third that comment These people are not very interesting. My peanut butter and Nutella sandwich during the show was much more interesting than the demonstration on peanut butter. And live long and prosper.
Yep. All right.
And it was interactive too, remember?
Yep. Also, Mr. Crusher, do you want to promote your own show very quickly?
The Lion Ghost show will be on in approximately 3 hours from now at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah.
You're welcome to come on. The topic will be women in religion, the suppression of women in religion, and possibly conspiracy theories. I mean, right after the show, if you want, you can go to the channel now because we're going to have maybe some kind of talk session.
All right. Very interesting. Thank you very much, everyone. This is going to be uploaded to YouTube within the next 24 hours and to iTunes. The links are all below, and we've got an email address if you're listening on the podcast. You want to raise any issues, it's contact@trollingwithlogic.com. So thank you very much, everyone. And like I say, we are out of here, so I'll make it so.
Bye.
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 And good evening, everyone. Welcome to Trolling with Logic. It is 14th of April 2013, 6 p.m. here in the UK, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Today we're not taking any calls. It's our famous live PWNage where we're going to take a kind of a critical look at a famous creationist documentary, and we'll see if it adds up at all. So joining me today, well, I welcome my esteemed crew. Wesley Crusher, welcome.
Hello, Captain.
Thank you, sir. Commander Data, are you there?
Hello, Captain.
And number one.
Here as always.
Okay, so we're setting course for a question of origins, and I think, are we ready to engage, crew?
I'm always ready to engage.
Oh, and just to let everyone know, whenever we encounter any critical errors, the crew will yell stop, and we'll take a look at them. Just if there's any kind of small errors, which I'm sure we never come across them anyway. So, anyway, engage.
In the beginning, there was nothing. A vacuum, void, empty space. And in this empty space...
Can you, this is really something that Marty ought to be addressing, but he's not here. I don't know whether or not they're about to talk about the Big Bang or whether they're about to talk about creation according to Genesis. If they're talking about the Big Bang, then before the Big Bang there wasn't even a vacuum, there wasn't even empty space because there wasn't any space.
There was literally no material at all.
Yeah, but there wasn't even no material. There was kind of...
There was no universe.
Yeah,
there was no space, there was no time, there was no nothing.
It's just like they say, it's even impossible to try and visualize what there was before the Big Bang.
Yeah.
Wait, here's a visualization. Like, the SpongeBob episode when they went back in time. Remember that white room? It was just white. There's nothing. Remember?
Nope.
Oh.
I remember the Futurama episode where they did that.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Well, okay, similar thing then.
All right, shall we carry on?
Yep.
Sure.
Space, there emerged a primordial fireball. Billions of years ago, this fire...
What the fuck? Primordial fireball?
I don't even know what that means.
No.
I don't know either. Is it like... Okay.
I feel like I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons. Something has passed.
I felt like I was playing Pokemon for a second. Like, out of nowhere. Charmander. Fireball! Yeah.
Fireball exploded. This explosion generated all space, energy, matter.
How can it generate all space when you just said that before it happened there was empty space?
From empty space comes. I don't know.
Yeah.
From empty space does come. Now, the thing that confuses me is just it's not that everything was created after the Big Bang. Everything was in the ball itself, and it just expanded.
Yeah, I mean,
that's all that happened.
There's also this problem with the word explosion. I mean,
it's expansion. It's inflation.
Yeah, nobody really knows how fast the Big Bang was if you could quantify such a thing. But yeah, it's probably better to talk of it in terms of an expansion of space-time.
The universe expanded rapidly, producing electrons, neutrinos, photons, and quarks. Soon, this energy began interacting, forming protons and neutrons. Matter continued colliding and interacting. Over time, the first simple elements formed. These elements also collided as the primordial soup continued to expand.
Oh.
What the fuck? Primordial soup?
They are mixed together. It's insane.
I mean, okay, whoever said that soup has to be a liquid, but no, I mean, the primordial soup is usually a straw man targeted at the origin of life and not the origin of things like stars, which is what they're actually trying to get at.
Evidently, the soup expanded across the entirety of the universe.
It's a gassy soup, I guess. I mean, I remember reading that the universe then was I think it was transparent, if I remember correctly.
It was basically a lot of gas, yeah. And
it was transparent.
Yeah. There were sort of clouds in it, but it wasn't. There wasn't anything solid that you could really look at. And there probably wasn't an awful lot of light either. I mean, they mentioned that photons were created, but really most photons come from stars and so.
Now I think gamma rays would have been from pair production, an electron hitting a anti-electron.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much it.
Yeah, it would have been pretty dark, I
think. Cosmic and particulate evolution continued, and stars began to group, forming into the earliest galaxies. And then, just 5 billion years ago, something wondrous occurred. Within a cloud of gas in a spiral arm of the Milky Way galaxy, our sun formed.
Stop! Why was there sound? You're in space. There is no air. You have no sound when there's no air.
Can I just say that I think that Star Trek is in part guilty for perpetuating this myth.
Indeed it is. Star Trek has had many explosions where explosions should not be happening. Rather the sounds.
So did Star Wars, though, right? I mean, was Star Wars before?
Well, yeah, Star Wars was way less scientific than even Star Trek, so let's just not even go there.
What about 2001: A Space Odyssey?
They get it right, don't they? The only thing.
Yeah, it was pretty quiet in space.
Almost everything is accurate in 2001 except for when there's zero gravity, people move in slow motion for some reason. But no, other than that, it's fine. I mean, Alien as well, their slogan, of course, was in space, no one can hear you scream, but at the end the ship explodes and you hear that as well. But yeah, no, we're not in any position to comment when we're all dressed as Star Trek characters. But yeah, it's a...
Hey, we can still critique ourselves on this matter.
That is true.
This new star gave birth to planets, moons, and asteroids.
No.
One of these.
The star gave birth to the planet. That's a new one.
That is a new one. I did not know that planets were just formed from a star forming, and it just kind of like the planets just kind of emerged from the star and went out into orbit or something like that.
I mean, what
isn't that what isn't that like what one of the creationists say, like the moon was something that was from the Earth, like it like flew off from the Earth?
Well, that's actually I believe that's actually the consensus is that the moon.
No, not the one that's the impact one. I'm talking about like the one where the Earth, like they just say the moon came off the Earth, like it just like ejected out of the Earth from nothing.
I've never heard that one.
That one's new to me. I don't know that one.
I won't comment on that. We're not talking about the lunar bukkake theory, whereby water was ejected at the moon.
Oh no, we're not. I don't think we're at that point yet.
It's a bit early in the evening to be talking about that.
And welcome to the bridge, Commander Worf.
Hey.
I may have to leave very soon, just quickly. I've got dinner in the oven.
All right. Oh, well, we're still on the beginnings of the solar system, so...
Oh yeah. So I'm gonna have to run off while we're dealing with stupid that's right up my alley.
Yeah.
Yeah, evidently, yeah.
Okay, let's carry on, shall we?
I'll just quickly say that one thing that they've missed out is that our solar system is, I think, a second generation star. There was originally a single star with no planets, and when that collapsed, it fused all the heavier elements like iron and oxygen and uranium and so on, and they created our solar system. But yes, the planets aren't formed from our sun that we know it now, formed from the debris of another star, which is then accumulated.
Probably not one star. Probably a lot of them.
Okay, then. Star orgy.
These planets, known as Earth, developed an atmosphere. Earth's environment believed to be filled with volcanic eruptions, lightning, turbulent weather.
Developed an atmosphere?
He worked really hard on it.
Chemical agents or replication errors.
Mutations really do occur. They make all kinds of changes in genes. Birth defects, disease organisms.
Sorry, we'll stop there for a second. It's not necessarily wrong to call it an error, certainly when it comes to replication errors, because you can have mismatching of the DNA whereby the wrong bases in the DNA are paired up. You could regard that as an error because it's not a comfortable way of doing it. I know that part of the reason why they might choose that word is that it's loaded in the sense that it's regarded as a bad thing. So
the reason I wouldn't call it an error is because to call something an error sort of presupposes a level of
correctness.
Yeah, it does. It proposes a level of correctness to what the DNA is supposed to be, and there's nothing saying what the DNA is supposed to be, so that's why I have a problem calling it an error.
Yeah, I mean, it's a term that's used in molecular biology a fair amount of the time, but yeah, I wouldn't quibble over it too much, but yeah, I can understand that they might have chosen that word with a certain agenda in mind.
They're great at explaining the origin of disease, death, and disaster, not at all at explaining the origin of something new, some new trait that never exists, all the mutations we know about.
Did you not just explain how that happens with, with genes duplicating and causing a bit of a difference in the genes how they originally were? You just explained it. How can you sit there and say, oh, they can't explain this? You just did!
Say the word information. I dare you. I double dare you, motherfucker.
They said it.
Wrong film.
They said it? Oh,
I don't think he did.
Yeah.
I didn't hear it, but...
They called the genetic code, and they said the information...
Oh.
I mean, well, he says that he also says that mutation doesn't account for the presence of new features. Now, what are you classing as a new feature? If it's just something like a change in the color of an organism or part of an organism, then that's most certainly explained by mutation. For example, I mean, I'm a plant scientist, so I'm actually going to pick an example. But
I honestly think when they say a change, they want something like in the 50s, like what radiation would do to like an ant. It would cause it to become a giant freaking mutant that shoots fire and stuff. I think that's what they want. They want something like that.
Or a dog giving birth to a cat.
Or Godzilla. Godzilla would disprove evolution, I think.
Yeah.
There are plenty of examples of mutations creating new phenotypes, as they're called, which is the sort of the visible properties of an organism. And if they're quite often those are, as they would say, losses of information, or rather they are genes becoming inactive, but not always. So if you want an example of a new trait that has arisen de novo, then nihilonase is one of the most commonly cited ones, which is a completely new trait to the organism, which has come out of nowhere and isn't a gene breaking, it's a completely new gene.
Know about are only changes in genes that already exist.
Darwin observed.
Stop.
Genes that already exist? Did it already exist that wolves had floppy ears? Do we see wolves with floppy ears anywhere?
Well, it could happen, I suppose. I've never seen one, but it could happen.
Well, I know it could because dogs are wolves that we picked that had floppy ears.
Yeah.
I guess, or we picked that characteristic to be more, noticeable, right?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is as well that he says that these changes only happen to genes that already exist. It's well understood that the mechanism by which new genes, in inverted commas, arise is by duplication of an existing gene and then alteration of that gene. So it's absolutely true what he's saying in a sense, but that doesn't mean that new genes can't arise just because they come from old genes or they come from copies of old genes.
Does that mean technically speaking, like a ladder, that DNA had all this information? Okay, not information, but genes to make a dinosaur and a dog from the same genetic code. So you can make a dinosaur from the genetic code of a dog.
Well, I don't know, you see, because the creationist argument is a bit strange. It's not quite that bad, but I think they suggest that God created all the different species on Earth containing all the potential genes for the various types that we observe, and then they've been selectively lost or re-expressed or whatever.
So would it be better to say if I can get a sparrow to an ostrich?
No, yeah, potentially. It depends who you ask. I don't know. You're asking somebody.
Why, if we do?
Well, okay. So the question of why indicates a purpose, and the purpose is generally indicated by some sort of consciousness inflicting a purpose onto something else. So asking why we exist is begging the question that there is an outside force that gives a certain purpose or has some sort of purpose in mind for our existence. That's not necessarily the case. If you want to say, why do I exist? Well, that can be defined in several different ways. You can go into a religious philosophy or your own personal philosophy, which is generally a sort of existentialist kind of philosophy, which is that you sort of create your own purpose. And I personally think that's a lot better than something else has a purpose for you. Don't fucking worry about it.
What created that thing's purpose?
Oh, let's not go there now.
Have pondered these questions. And when it comes to the subject of origins, there are basically two views: the evolution theory and the creation theory.
There is no creation theory, you're full shit.
And it's a false dichotomy. I gotta go check on dinner.
Okay.
Have fun.
Kapla. Just had to get that in there.
Strange
I bet a reptile will just come out of his oven. Like right now.
Like right now, in accordance to how
like a velociraptor will pop out and just maul him to death. Like from the movie Carnosaur.
Yeah, well, given what's coming up in this video, that's actually kind of more believable than what we're about to hear.
Our universe, the Earth, and all life came into existence as a result of an explosion of matter in billions of years of time. However, there are others who believe the observable evidence points towards a creator. So how can we know?
And they're wrong.
What does the observable evidence indicate?
I have a good feeling that we're going to have a bit of an issue when it comes to what observable evidence is.
Yeah.
I also have this thing to say. I'd say, if we evolve from molecules, why are there still molecules? Just saying.
Both evolution and creation scientists have observed and agree that there is great variety within each species. Darwin noticed this variety and adaptability among finches. He noticed that the finches' beaks varied in size and shape, and that the beak's features affected the survivability of the finch. Today we notice a great variety of dogs. It is believed that all 450 breeds of dogs present today had a common ancestor. Most scientists believe that this ancestor was very similar to the present-day wolf. Scientists also witness natural selection, or survival of the fittest. Evolutionists and creationists agree that those animals that are the strongest, healthiest, or most adaptive to their environment are more likely to survive and go on to reproduce.
This is probably, we said that both evolutionists and creationists accept this. That isn't really contentious nowadays, but part of the problem with Darwin's theory in his own day was not so much to do with the fact that he proposed that we were related to all other life on Earth, or that we descended from something more ape-like. One of the major problems with acceptance, certainly in the Church of England, was the fact that they didn't like the idea of natural selection. They had this rather harmonious ideal of God's creation in which all animals were happy and didn't feel pain or suffering, and God was benevolent to all of them. And Darwin's theory, whereby the implication is that every animal either dies horrifically or starves, or that they spend their life constantly in hunger and fear and so on, that was the really controversial point. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if there were still creationists today who didn't accept natural selection because they want to cling on to this idealistic view of nature. That's my bit done.
The weaker animals, which are unable to adapt, are
Okay, I'm
less
back.
likely to survive. We also observe gene mutations occurring. The DNA in all living organisms contains all the genetic information of life. Sometimes an error is introduced in this genetic code.
An error?
This is called
Oh,
a
is that what a
mutation.
mutation is? I thought it was just a change.
Mutations often cause disease and can be induced by radiation, chemical...
I'm sorry. Yeah, I wonder how many times during this ponage I'm going to do this joke, but it's not that it developed an atmosphere, it's that there were, gaseous materials, or materials that would be gaseous given that particular temperature, and then a simple case of, say it with me, gravity!
Yeah, I think it was the case that certainly all the rocky, all the planets, they would obviously attract gases in their gravitational field. And then in the case of the lighter ones like Mercury and Mars, that atmosphere was then lost. In the case of Mars, it's not completely gone, but yeah, it's not the case that they get an atmosphere. They start off with an atmosphere and then they might go on to lose it.
Well, the atmosphere they started off with is not what they ended up with.
No, that's true.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
They might come onto this. I think the early Earth's atmosphere didn't have any water on it. It's generally accepted that the water came from...
Wait, did Mercury ever have an atmosphere?
But, it's believed that Mercury used to have an atmosphere. It doesn't anymore.
It might have had in the very early solar system,
but
basically when the planet solidified, it would have evaporated very quickly.
Ah.
Yeah.
Mixed atoms and energy to create the first simple living cells.
They kind of skipped out a lot on that one.
Yeah.
There was a lot of skipping around. Just atoms and stuff colliding together, all of a sudden cells. No, there's a lot of shit in between there.
Yeah.
As evolution continued, fish appeared in the seas on planet Earth.
Again, you're skipping quite
Some of
a
these
bit.
fish developed into amphibians, and through natural selection changed into reptiles. A segment of these reptiles evolved into a variety of creatures, including mammals.
What?
That was a bird!
You've got to remember we're watching it out of
And
sync.
then, just 600,000
Hang on.
years
I guess I'm gonna have to ask, sound, did reptiles, did mammals evolve from reptiles?
Yes. Mammal-like reptiles. Mammal-like reptiles.
Oh, okay. I thought they were separate branches.
No, I mean like this. Like, wait, I can explain this. I know a lot about this stuff. Permian-age reptile mammals were what cynidids, I think, if I remember correctly. They were the forerunner of mammals. Other cynidids, I think, or maybe it was a different group, split off and became reptiles, which became dinosaurs and birds and that such.
Okay, so it's a case of reptiles and mammals share a common ancestor that was reptile-like.
Like, yeah, like the Metrodon. You know what that is?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an ancestor of mammals. It's one of them.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, that's what they said isn't sufficiently far from the truth that I would quibble with it. And
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Go on.
Years ago, an isolated group of these primates evolved into man's earliest ancestors. This is our amazing evolutionary heritage. And evolution continues today as we evolve to our even higher destiny in the universe.
Stop.
Yeah, stop.
Evolution does not have a goal. It just has, well, pretty much what survives, works.
Yeah, and it's not a higher. Yeah, I mean.
We're not the pinnacle.
No, and it's not that what we're going to evolve into is higher up some ladder than we are.
You could argue it's further
different.
along a path, but yes, it's not necessarily better in any way.
Yeah.
Oh, bit of panpipes now.
A question of origins. How did the universe and all things that we see here on this planet come into being? Why do we exist? Hi, I'm Roger Oakland.
Hi.
Most of us have
Now, hold on a second. Why do we exist? That's not a scientific question.
We do exist, though, so why do we need to ask